Welcome everyone to this Portal to Ascension webinar today. My name is Adam Apollo, and today we're going to meet your galactic family. We're going to take an adventure together through time and space and explore new worlds and new civilizations. We're going to boldly go back into our deep and ancient past and explore where we came from, how we got here, and who we are. Some of the deepest questions that each of us face every day involve, who am I? How did I get here? What's my purpose? And where are we going? What lies in the future for us? What can we create? What is possible in terms of technology and culture and society? The keys held by our galactic family teach us, show us a way to live on a planet in peace and harmony. And not just a single planet, but across planets, connecting people, connecting many different backgrounds, a diversity of life and wisdom and awareness, and bringing all of those seeds of awareness, all of those keys together is part of the purpose of us as a human race, joining together on this very interesting planet, almost like an experiment, sometimes seeming like it has gone wrong, and yet witnessing the incredible beauty, diversity, and fusion that is constantly emergent on continents around this planet, exploring the incredible life that Earth has to offer, the library of wisdom that it has to offer us, if we can take care of it and take care of each other. So many of you joining this workshop may be coming from different backgrounds. So I'll leave a little introduction space so that we can explore some of the foundations for where this knowledge comes from and how we can do our own work to confirm this information, test it out for ourselves, and actually get involved with some of the richness of resources that are out there for us to explore. I'll tell you a quick brief story about myself. When I was a child, I had a couple very powerful UFO experiences. The first one being as I was walking around a lake. I was maybe 6, first grade, and my mother worked at this ranch in Red River, New Mexico. And the ranch had this lake. And for some reason this night, I just really wanted to go for a walk around the lake at night. I didn't do this very often, but I just wanted to be outside. And in Red River, New Mexico, there's very little atmosphere because it's at 9,000 feet elevation in the middle of these mountains. The stars are absolutely incredible. I always thought everywhere the sky just looked like, shining, sparkling crystal, just of lattice of stars everywhere. Difficult to even find the spaces between them. And so I went for a walk around this lake and I was just looking at the stars. I remember it was a little bit brighter night. The moon was out. And I came around this one side of the lake looking towards the mountains. And all of a sudden, this brilliant light shows up in the sky. And it gets super bright. It comes down. And it's just like this blinding light. And I just stared at it in awe for a moment. And then it shrunk back and shot over the mountain. I was 6 years old, so I didn't really know what to think. I went back to the cabin. I remember telling my mom, and she was like, "Oh, that's really strange, honey. Like, I don't really know what that was. That sounds really interesting." And tells my stepdad, and he's like, yeah, sure he did. That was my stepdad. And then, the next day I was thinking about it, and the next day after I was thinking about it. And after a while of thinking about it, I wasn't even sure I'd even experienced it. I thought maybe it was a dream. I had no answers. It was just a powerful experience. This is how many of us first experience some kind of extraterrestrial starship, contact, UFO. We don't know how to process it. And so it seems so foreign that we just take it for whatever it was. And sometimes later, when having those kinds of powerful experiences, we actually come to doubt whether or not those experiences even happen to us. How many of you can relate to that? So then many years later, I was with my father and a few of my stepbrothers, and I was in a place just outside of St. Louis, Missouri, driving along this back road that my stepbrother liked to take to get back to the house. No traffic and peaceful, and it's through the woods and kind of up on this ridge. And all of a sudden, my stepbrother in the car, he's like, "Stop the car, stop the car." My dad pulls over, get out of the car, look up at the sky. He's pointing, and there's these 3 points of light rotating and sort of spinning back and forth across the sky. And it's just gracefully moving as it's spinning. And we're all just like, "What is that? Oh my God." And I was about 10 at this time. And everybody was like, "Holy God, that was a UFO, man. I don't know what that was, but that was amazing." And all of us saw it, and all of us had no idea what to think. We got back in the car and we drove on because it wove across the sky and then over the horizon. Never seen anything else like it up to that point. And later on, I talked to my dad and stepbrothers about it, and they were like, yeah, that was crazy. I don't know what that was. That's a strange thing, but guess strange things happen every day, right? So then around the year 2000, it was in 2001, I believe, there was a National Press Club conference in Washington, D.C., and this was brought together by Dr. Stephen Greer of the Disclosure Project. Many of you have, I'm sure, heard his name before. And one of his colleagues that had helped to film this event came down and was in Asheville, and he had a copy of this video of the press club conference. And I ran into him out of nowhere at the grocery store, and he ends up giving me a copy of this video and tells me that Stephen's coming to town. And so I go home and I put this VHS tape in and watch it. And for the first time, I start seeing all of these other people talking about something that I've been thinking about and wondering about for so long. And I just had all of these questions in my head that began to find answers in some of these testimonies. Now, I had already woken up and realized a lot about myself by the time this came into play. When this guy shows up, 2001, I'm 19 years old. And when I was 15, I started getting downloads from myself or a higher part of myself that involved sacred geometry, consciousness, lattices of the universe, my entire unified harmonic matrix theory, which you're welcome to explore and check out. I have information about that on some of my other websites, and I'm working on a full course of that material, both coming at it from the physics standpoint, as well as the metaphysical and spiritual perspectives. And I had developed a very clear library for myself at this point of geometric language, light language, understanding how energy moves and flows, understanding that consciousness is not just resident within the body, but that consciousness is part of an underlying quantum field that permeates through all of space-time. And I had developed my own understandings of this quantum field, understanding it as a lattice of energy, as a geometric crystalline structure with very, very high level tensegrity, which is a Buckminster Fuller word, in which there's just the right amount of push and pull. It's highly energetic, but because it's so well balanced, it has such a perfect balance in its tensegrity, you don't actually see most of that energy except for where it's curving into matter, or where planets are being made, or where stars are forming, or where atoms exist. And in the rest of space, it's in a pretty nice state of equilibrium. And I'd come to understand some of these keys in physics. I'd come to understand certain aspects of myself, and I'd had a couple experiences of memories and flashbacks of previous times in that I didn't fully at this juncture know exactly how to grasp the information, but I had pretty definitively proved through third-party experiences and multiple person experiences that I may have had other lifetimes on Earth. And that kind of thing is something that, you takes years to be able to process. And I had just started really having these kinds of memory and flashback experiences, and just started meeting people that could confirm those kinds of experiences for me. But this set me on a path of transpersonal psychology development, in which I started to really study myself. I started to really study my consciousness. I started to look at these visions and these memories very objectively, as much as I could, not taking anything for granted, recognizing that you can always distort a memory. If you tell a story about what happened to you in kindergarten, you're going to remember things that are correct, and you're going to remember things that are not correct and that didn't actually happen. But if you have other people in your life that were there and they remember parts of it too, now together you can form an objective analysis of the experience, and you can actually get a lot more information about what actually happened. And so I had just started meeting some of these other people that shared some of these memories with me, and sometimes, in some cases, had simultaneous flashbacks, or in one case, a guy I didn't even know got completely blistered drunk on a Halloween night and begins crying and apologizing to me for crimes he did to me in the Middle Ages. And I had to process that, along with the fact that he was calling me by the name I had remembered from that lifetime, as well as the woman who was a friend of mine, who was my one of my girlfriend's roommate in college. He knew her name too, and I had remembered her name from this other lifetime as well. And neither of us had told anybody, and the kinds of things that he expressed remorse for and asked forgiveness for were so deep and so intense that I felt completely through my whole body the remembering of the experience, which ended in us killing each other. And so I had began to really study this phenomenon, and it was a critical point of my research development, because this would enable me to actually do work to study extraterrestrial phenomenon in the years to come, in a way that I could do the studies and not just be relying on my own intuitions or my own visions or my own telepathic communication, but actually develop a capacity to not only verify my own experiences, but also verify experiences for other people, and share those experiences among each other, so that they can actually get to know that what they're seeing, what they're remembering, what they're going through might actually be extremely accurate in many cases, when there is information that is crossing over between people that is all true. Or that many people are experiencing simultaneously. And so back to Stephen Greer, he comes to Asheville. I go to his workshop at UNCA. I listen and I watch and I check out all of these insights that he's bringing, talking about individuals, that spoke in the press conference, revealing some of his own personal research. And the picture that the Disclosure Project paints for me at this time in 2001 is that there are absolutely have been extraterrestrial contacts. There have been spacecraft that crashed on the planet. There have been recovery projects for some of the technologies in those crafts. There have been what they call ARVs, or alien reproduction vehicles, developed. There have been over 50 different species documented by parts of the secret government or black ops areas of the government that have, you know, been well documented and well verified from data found on some of these ships, as well as data of actually capturing different kinds of craft. And that we have new energy systems, and that those energy systems have been kept secret from the public and kept under wraps, primarily due to the military-industrial complex and its intertwined relationships with the oil companies and energy companies, and some of the offshore, you know, American offshore interests in certain areas of the world due to their energetic richness. In some cases, some people believe there's stargates in some of the locations in the Middle East that have been, you know, being attempted to be secured, along with a vast amount of cultural wealth, knowledge, wisdom, and of course, oil. And that there's a variety of processes that have been going on behind the scenes in the secret government, looking at this kind of information, looking at our relationship among the galaxy, and that all of it is being kept secret from the public simply to avoid creating mass panic, some of which would be caused by the very disinformation campaigns that the secret government created to keep people from looking into this information since the 1950s. And so they got themselves in a real nasty knot, if you know what I mean. And I got to really get the picture of, you know, I understand why you would keep this information secret. I understand why you would hold back these things from the public. I understand why, if you know, screwed up and started sending out disinformation to scare people away from the information, that turning around and starting to tell them the truth could be an extremely difficult process. And I get it. And I get that it takes a timeline. Well, here we are 15 years later. And while the process has moved forward considerably, there still has never been a large-scale congressional hearing on this information, which the Disclosure Project has been pushing for a very long time. One of the greatest hearings that has occurred regarding this information was done by Stephen Bassett, and it's the Citizens Hearing on Disclosure. There's an incredible series of videos. I highly recommend checking them out. It's testimony by many of the same people that work with the Disclosure Project. And it's deeply revelatory around the kinds of interactions in the modern age alone that we've had with extraterrestrial species. Now, if you look back into history, as I discussed in the Extraterrestrial Disclosure Conference that happened here on Portal to Ascension recently, you'll see that there is a whole span of different events and different things that have occurred for different cultures all over the world that point to very, very clear, direct extraterrestrial contact. But that's not the purpose of this workshop. A lot of that information is stuff that you can go and get, you can look up yourself, you can explore, and many of you who are here today have already explored a lot of that. I just thought I'd give you a little bit of an introduction to myself so that you have a little bit of a context for my approach and the knowledge and experience that I have in this area as we go forward to actually getting into and talking about some of the different galactic species out there. Now, I have, in my journey through time and in my work, I've also been a speaker at a youth leadership conference at the White House. I've been a speaker at the United Nations on multiple occasions, and I have participated in a lot of conferences and festivals around the world, sharing insights like this, and also insights on the future of humanity and the future of human technology, and where we're actually going and what the world is going to look like when we get to the other side. So today, I'm going to help you to understand that a lot of the cultures and a lot of the insights and diversity that we have on this planet is directly related to and connected to the diversity around the galaxy. There are certain questions that come up for archaeologists and people who are studying history when we look back in history and we look at the diversity of races that we have here on the planet. When you look at someone who is a Nigerian and you put a Nigerian man next to me and you look at him and he's 7 feet tall and his skin is beautiful dark blue and my skin is this white, you know, not white at all, tan, pale, kind of pinkish and slightly green tones. And you look at the two of us and you look at his face structure, you look at his bone structure, you look at his body type, and you look at my body, and we could be completely different species. And yet we're both from this planet. Now, does it make sense in the timeline that's laid out by archaeologists, and not to mention the Christian timeline, which we won't even get into that, but in the timeline laid out by archaeologists, generally accepted human evolution timeline, you know, from the time of Neanderthals and et cetera, and you have people coming from Africa, right? So people maybe that look like him or similar, and they spread out from Africa to the Middle East and then into Europe, and then they go into Asia, and then they cross an ice bridge and come into North America. Does it make sense that the lands that they're in and the level of sunlight that they're getting is going to be so substantially different that it's going to make me look like this versus this Nigerian guy? Does it make sense that we look like this and that a Native American man standing on this side of me looks like he does with his bone structure and with his shape? And then we put next to him a Korean woman and compare and analyze the differences in our body type, skin tone, facial structure, bone structure, all of that. The diversity is so great that it actually doesn't make sense that simply differences in sunlight, the amount of trees, the certain qualities of the landscapes in those areas are going to change our genetic structure and our body types that drastically. And I've been wondering about this for a very long time, and you know, looked into a lot of archaeological studies, and generally they don't really know how to accept any other solution. I mean, there isn't another solution in their minds. There isn't another explanation. And yet, if you look at some of the ancient cultures, you know, that have been around in some of these different locations, you find a very different story. You find a story from the Dogon tribe in Africa talking about beings coming down in these disc-shaped ships, forming a pool of water and jumping into it, swimming up to them. And they're dolphin beings with technology on them, the nomos, who tell them that they're from this star system and help them chart it on their cave walls to map the exact rotation between Sirius A and B. You have the Maori cultures talking about their ancestry coming from the Seven Sisters in the sky. You have Native American tribes talking about where their different species have, where their cultures have come from. The white buffalo calf woman of the Lakota, and, you know, teacher coming from the star nations who came to bring them these different wisdom keys from across the galaxy to help them maintain peace and spirituality in their culture. The Maya, when you look at the Maya, they say that basically when we came to this planet, there was this 4 corn people which came from the 4 corners of the river in the sky, meaning the Milky Way galaxy. And the 4 corn people are these 4 different skin colors. And they came here and they spread across the world. And that is where this diversity of people came from. And this is how they articulate it. And archaeologists agree that they're articulating that there's these 4 corn people coming from the 4 corners of the river in the sky, which is the galaxy. But do they actually accept and assess that humanity, and a major portion of humanity, is actually from other planets in the galaxy? Well, that would be a big leap, right? That would be like accepting that Star Trek is real, or that there's UFOs. Oh my goodness, right? And so it's a difficult leap for them to make. When you go to Egypt, you find all kinds of hints and keys that there are other species out there, that there are different kinds of beings, that there have been interfaces with gods and goddesses. You see the same thing in Rome and Roman cultures. You see the same thing in Greece. If you look at the gods and goddesses, you know, you have gods coming down from Mount Olympus, where they hang out above the clouds, and they come down, they make love with humans sometimes, and form demigod offspring, hybrid offsprings. So I was tracking some of these threads, and I had begun to have certain kinds of experiences. And in some of the experiences, and in one in particular, I began to have a series of memories about a certain time period that happened on Earth. And in this time period, there was a global civilization. There was a totally connected civilization around the planet. And there were cities on all of these different continents. And all the cities were sort of within a certain band from the equator, kind of between the Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn. And above and below that, it was mostly ice. It was massive amounts of ice all over the crown of the planet and all over the base of the planet. But right around the equator zone, there was this very, very active land trade, seed trade, interconnection, and communication going on around the planet. And I started to become aware that this civilization that I was seeing and remembering, and having other friends also remember, was this place that we tend to call Atlantis in this day and age. But while people often look for one city, one place that they're going to call Atlantis, I began to realize that Atlantis was a civilization. It's not a place. It's not a city. There were many, many cities in the Atlantean civilization. And these different cities were all interconnected and had some amazing structures that were built. Massive pyramid structures, massive temple structures, some built onto cliff walls on the sides of mountains, some built along the ocean, many of them down by the ocean, because this was a very seafaring civilization. And it had grown out of the civilization before it, which was known as Mu, and later called often Lemuria. And these early Lemurian and Mu civilizations had been basically connected very, very strongly with the Pleiadian star system, and had been in many ways seeded by Pleiadian star families. And in this memory, in this lifetime, I was human, but I was not exactly human. I was what I would call half elven, in which I was human, but I also had certain characteristics very, very reminiscent of the elves in the Lord of the Rings stories. And I I lived in the forest early on. I grew up in a forest. I went to a Gaian academy with my family, and had relationships, some of which I've re-met people from, now that remember this time in this period on Earth's history. And I remember feeling like, even though my family wanted me to stay and cultivate and create this experience, of helping to further our family's mission here on this planet, that I needed to go to be with the humans. I wanted to go and meet all of these other beings and connect with the humans and connect in their cities and learn about their culture and share my insights there with them. And so, to the dismay of my parents, I left the woods and I traveled for about a day and ended up finding my way to this city on a peninsula. And this city was absolutely beautiful, white walls and beautifully carved houses and structures with brilliant gold and purple domes, and these different temples. And it was a gorgeous city. And I came to live in this city and reside there. And I began to bring my insights and my knowledge about earth wisdom and about different keys of how life and forest and growth of plants contains within it secrets about how energy moves and evolves, how energy systems move and evolve, and how crystals can store different types of information. And a lot of this knowledge that I brought to this city in the age of Atlantis was the same information that I was remembering when I was 15 years old in this body here. I just didn't know where it came from until I started remembering this piece. And this is not even where it came from either. But I began to become aware of this larger context for my knowledge. And in this city of humans, there were other beings. There were other types of beings that were there that were also human, but not quite human. Like the little bit different races began to really show up. And this went on for some time, this civilization building up to the point where really the entire civilization was seeking to eventually leave the surface of the planet and actually reach the stars and reconnect with this expansive range of what they were aware of already at that time of different species from around the galaxy. Now I'm going to step back for a minute because I just told you a little bit of the storyline as I was flowing and as I was growing in my process of discovery. But in order to be fully honoring of your time with me here today, and also give you the full context of the information, I have to now step back a level further and tell you about some of the insights and the realizations and experiences that I had that showed me exactly what went down and when that was and how those things went down. So before I came to Atlantis, I was a Syrian ambassador. I had to face this deep and powerful memory during a powerful healing experience that occurred for me many years ago in 2005. And in this healing experience, I was clearing karmas from the age of Atlantis, and I was healing very, very deep wounds in myself, as well as freeing myself from a soul bond that I had created with a soul partner when I was Syrian. And this soul bond that I created with this partner was constructed in such a way that I was going to leave my body and die, and so was she, and we were going to travel through space to this Earth, this place where this human species was evolving very rapidly and coming together and having this incredible renaissance. And to be able to remember who we were, we created this soul bond, a weave, a construct that would connect together our energy fields in just the right way, so that when we were born onto this other planet, we would be able to remember who we are and be able to find each other. And so many of you who have the sense that you have a soul partnership, or, you know, a twin flame, or some kind of very, very deep soulmate that may be out there somewhere, or maybe you found them. A lot of the origin of where that comes from is that you probably set that up at some point in time. You made a contract, you made an agreement with that being. Now, sometimes those contracts and agreements are good, and they'll continue to serve you, and they'll continue to bring you information and wealth and knowledge about yourself, and reunite you with this beloved. And sometimes it's time to let those go. Sometimes you can serve your beloved even more by letting them go. It's a deep choice to make. And for me, at this current juncture, it was time for me to release this bond with this beautiful sister of mine from the Syrian system. And the clearing and releasing of the bond allowed us to complete the integration of the information that we had been carrying for over 13,000 years since we were Syrians on this other planet. Now, the thing about this was that when we were Syrians on this other planet, we were elves. I had pointy ears. I had tall, elongated body. I looked very much in some ways like I do now. Got a haircut recently. It brings out my elven nature a little bit more. And the way that we lived was in these massive, incredible tree cities. The trees were our refuge. And in the tree cities, down near the bottom in the deep forests, it would be so dark that it seemed like it'd be nighttime or deep twilight. And yet when you go up into these tree cities and climb all the way up towards the top, you start to come into this beautiful golden sunset-like light where all of the leaves filter the light through. And you can keep going all the way up to the temples near the top, which are brilliant and bright, shining, catching all of the brilliant starlight coming in. And it was rarely night. For most of the year, we rarely had nighttime. There was always sun shining. And I knew that we had 2 suns and we had 2 moons. Now, when I was in high school, I read The Lord of the Rings, middle school into high school. And I got so fascinated by Tolkien's detail, by the way that he crafted and expressed the knowledge and the detail of these worlds. How did he articulate with such exquisite detail the nature of these peoples and cultures and places? And so I decided to do a research project on Tolkien in high school. And I discovered something very interesting. Tolkien was not originally an author. He wasn't a writer. He hadn't written books before. It wasn't his thing. Tolkien was a linguist. He studied languages. And he could speak and write in 7 different languages, and he was studying all the origins of different languages. And he embarked on this very interesting experiment where he was going to attempt to create a new language. Now, in the process of beginning to do this, as he began to articulate the curves and the moves of the written language and the way that the words would be articulated, he began hearing the words in his head, and the words started to stream together into sentences. And then he began to start dreaming about the people who spoke that language. And he started having visions about this people that spoke this language. And so Tolkien began to actually take down and make notes on and articulate and write down the stories of the cultures of the people who spoke this language, and this language was the Elven language. And that first series of stories that he articulated became known as the Silmarillion, which is one of Tolkien's earliest books, takes place before The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And I found something very interesting about this when I looked back at my experiences with this. And I had a dream in high school where I was at this school and I flew up into the stars and I went flying and I shot through a stargate in the Big Dipper, and I end up on this planet and there's two suns. And I'm walking around this field and I have this nautilus shell shaped home, and I have this big observatory. It's really bright. I'm out in this field and I go in the observatory and it's dark in there and I can see the stars through the panels on the ceiling. And I wake up sometime later and I start looking up dual star systems, on Google to figure this out. And Google had just basically come out at that point. And I find out about the Dogon tribe. And they're talking about these two stars rotating, and it's on their cave walls. And it just happens to be exactly the same map as the astronomers had just figured out in the 1980s, that Sirius A and B rotate around each other. I mean, they're just figured out that rotation. And here's this tribe that has it on the cave wall. That was one of my little stepping stones of, wow, that is really interesting. And then I looked at this project that I've been doing with Tolkien, and I realized that the Elven people in Tolkien's stories came from a land of eternal sun, and they crossed the great seas and came to Middle Earth, where they met humans and other tribes and other races. And I thought, wow, well, what kind of land would have eternal sun? Probably one with two stars. Because then, if you're between the two stars, imagine Jupiter imagine if Jupiter ignited and was a star. Well, when the sun is on this side and Jupiter is on this side, you still have sunlight. I mean, it might be weaker, but it's still going to be bright. It's still going to be daytime, and daytime on this side of the planet, all the way until the periods of the year when Jupiter is on the same side as the sun from you, and then you see two brilliant stars in your sky, and you have nighttime on the other side. And why the giant trees? Well, of course, they're getting nonstop sunlight. They're continuously digesting all that sunlight and growing into massive, massive trees, which is protecting all the other forms of life, including the humanoid forms of life, who in living on that planet would have a lot of difficulty living in all of that light. Now, there are some elven tribes, I like to call them wild elves, that live out on the plains, and they are dark-skinned, and they have very similar features. And then the forest elves and the star elves, are mostly in lighter skinned and live in the forest areas, or sometimes up in the polar regions, where we have massive stargates and massive constructions built to help to organize and coordinate communication and travel between different starships. Now, it's been a lot of time for me going and astrally traveling to the Syrian star system to recover this knowledge and this information and to get to know this aspect of myself. But for those of you who are Syrian, who are Elven at heart, the words that I have spoken already resonate so deeply, you can't explain it. You don't know, or you do. You do know, actually, why it resonates so deeply. It's because it's a part of you. It's because it's who you are. You can't deny or ignore the fact that when you're riding in the car and you're traveling and the sun is coming through the leaves in those patterned rays, that some part of you just feels more peaceful, finds this inside. Can't deny that when you see light do incredible things, sparkle like a rainbow shard through a crystal, or you notice how light bends and moves in different fashions, that you're fascinated by it. The study of light, the study of the way that starlight moves, the fantastically interesting idea that when you capture the light of a star, it looks like a rainbow. And it's broken into all of these different little pieces. You can't deny the fact that you've felt a connection with fairies and the fae and the spirits of the forest, even if you're told none of that is real or true. You can't deny these things because they're part of who you are. It's not just because somebody read you some fantasy book as a kid. Most of you have had those experiences before you even knew about any of those things. And when you heard about those fantasy stories, you watched that first movie about a unicorn or whatever. It stimulated something in you so deep, so connected to who you are, that you couldn't ignore it. And yet, who do you talk to about it? Who do you share it with? Many of us get drowned in the programs of modern society. We get drowned by the stories that we're told and what's true and what's not. We grow up being told at some point that what's in our intuition, what's in our imagination is not real. And we have to focus on what's real. Well, what is real? How do you know the edge of what's real? How do you know the boundary of what exists and what doesn't? Who told you? School? The academic world? The academic world, the same academic world that in order to get tenure, you have to publish and create a paper that proves along the lines of the same theorems that have already been created. And if you don't, if you try to go too far off the wall, then you fall off the academic spectrum. You become a pseudoscientist. You lose your credibility because what you're doing is not based on all of the agreed upon things that exist up until that point. Well, that's exactly what Copernicus did. That's exactly what Galileo did. That's exactly what most of the greatest thinkers throughout all of history have done. They went off the edge of the academic spectrum. They went off the edge of what was agreed upon as true. And it's through going past and outside of those boxes that they were able to obtain information that changed our understanding of what is real, that taught us that the earth is round, or reminded us, that taught us that we orbit a sun and not the other way around, that taught us that, I mean, you name it, so many of the great insights, Einstein, Planck, Copernicus, Galileo, all of the Greek and Roman philosophers, just amazing, brilliant thinkers, and they're outside of the box of what's agreed upon. So whoever's told you what's real and told you the limits of what exists and what doesn't probably doesn't know. And neither do we. We're always exploring. We're always growing. We're always discovering. And so in this process and in this journey together today, a lot of our work is to realize that we also don't know who we are. We're also discovering that right now. Maybe we've had insights about it. Maybe you had some channel, or maybe you had somebody do a card reading for you and tell you you're a Pleiadian, right? And maybe that resonated a little bit, but you have to find out for yourself. You're the only one with the keys to that castle. You're the only one that can access the real, true, and beautiful information about who you are. Many of us are not from here. When I was a Syrian ambassador and we were looking at this mission to come to Earth, I knew that we were not alone, that there were many other species and many other beings from other worlds who were all also looking at Earth and seeing this renaissance as a potential juncture point for humanity to join the rest of this galactic community. And so ambassadors from many, many star systems came to be born here as humans. Now, many of the ley lines of the genetics for these different races, going back to that origin point, had already been seeded. There were species, gods, goddesses, came down, mated with certain humans, fell in love, had experiences, beauty, and they seeded offspring, demigod offspring, that began to create a bloodline, different bloodlines, and different hybrid species of human and extraterrestrial beings that began to generate whole races of people. They weren't large, there wasn't many, but it didn't need to be many. It didn't need to be many generations of this thing happening for there to be a vast diversity of part human and part extraterrestrial cultures on this planet. And those cultures, those different races and sub-races of humanity, had a lot easier time accepting souls from those planets. So if you're an Arcturian and you're wanting to go be born as a human, well, what's easiest is when a human Arcturian offspring or someone with some Arcturian genetics and some human genetics is going to have a child, and your soul can actually align with that DNA construct, because DNA is not just physical, it's also spiritual. And so your spiritual and physical DNA can actually go and be born into that bloodline much more easily than it could just being born into a human bloodline. And a lot of these galactic species, from the Syrians to the Arcturians, to the Pleiadians, to the Shiheli, to the Locrinon, to the Jahonians, had been exchanging blood for a long time, being born as each other, having hybrids with each other in some cases. And so there's already a lot of diversity and unity among these different star species. But mixing and working with and creating new racial lines among humans was a key to helping some of these star nations come in, be born as humans, and participate alongside humanity in supporting them to become part of this galactic network. Can't do it for them, couldn't show up in ships and just be like, we're going to do this for you, we're going to give you ships, we're going to help you come up here. We had to do it with them. And we're still doing it with each other. We're still in this process now of working with each other to become a galactic species as humans. Now, it would have been great if that could have happened in the time of Atlantis, but the Earth had her own growth cycle. She has her own growing pains and processes. I like to look at it as the fall of the Tower of Babel. As humans built their towers to reach the gods and become gods, we can always replace, in these cases, gods with star nations or extraterrestrials, because that's pretty much what's going on in these cases. So the humans are trying to build their tower to the gods, and God strikes them down and says, you can't do that. Well, that's a Christian translation. Deeper translation would say that they couldn't reach it and they fell. And when you look at this, you can see that maybe Gaia wasn't ready. Maybe Earth wasn't quite ready to become part of a telepathic planetary network. Maybe she hadn't unlocked enough of her energy body yet. And maybe a lot of the beings and the peoples that were coming together to try to accelerate this evolutionary process at the time of Atlantis were also putting pressure on the Earth. They were pressurizing the planetary field and causing a level of energetic expansion that wasn't sustainable. It wasn't working with the trees enough. It wasn't working with the soil, with the ground, with the other animals. We all are in this together, right? We're all in this together. And so Earth was like, pops her neck, breaks open the throat chakra, and a little bit of cracks in some of the crust set off some volcanic activity in the polar regions and earthquakes, causing a massive melting of ice, accelerating gases into the atmosphere, creating an accelerated greenhouse effect, along with a series of earthquakes, melting ice, raising water levels, and sending tidal waves to coasts all over the planet. And fare thee well, Atlantis, and all of your great knowledge and wisdom. But many peoples and many of our tribes didn't just sit and let the waves come in like I did, storing away crystals and secrets for the future. Others traveled on ships and went deep into the lands and kept those knowledge pieces sacred. And all those sacred seeds of knowledge that were spread around the world, they are all very similar. If you look at the metaphysical knowledge and the teachings and the spiritual wisdom in South America, in North America, in Asia, in Europe, in Australia, in Africa, and you look at the kinds of insights and archetypes that are present in their stories about the gods and the goddesses, and their stories about their origins, and their stories about energy and where we came from and life force, you find in the chi, prana, ki, odic force, resonant field, great spirit, all of these keys, they all point to the same truths because they're part of this global culture. And yet by being separate and by being spread out, new languages were able to develop, new cultures were able to develop. And this new development of all these new languages from star beings mixed with human beings and being in these new lands developed and enriched the whole flow of communicative energy on planet Earth. And we've been developing these abilities to communicate, to express ourselves with clarity and consistency in all of these different languages for 13,000 years. And now here we are at this bridge again, at this juncture. And in this juncture, we're suddenly beginning to realize that we need all languages to somehow come back together into oneness again. We're beginning to realize that the real, deeper underlying language is our telepathy. It's our ability to communicate straight to each other's minds by saying nothing and saying everything at the same time. And we're developing technologies that reflect those tools of telepathy. The internet, for example, is this incredible tool that gives us the capacity to express and receive information and think of something and then find out more about it, or think of someone and have them ping us immediately, calling us on Skype or texting us or sending us an email, and it's instantaneously showing us that our minds can send signals faster than anything else. And with augmentation like the internet, we can actually see that and witness that. We can see that all of our languages and our different idea structures all fit together and form a greater puzzle, a greater base of wisdom. We learn that we can translate with each other and see through so many different perspectives that we actually start to see ourselves as one circle, as one sacred hoop that is being woven together of threads of all colors. And as we're gaining these insights and we're awakening our third eyes, so is the third eye of the planet awakening. And we're taking it slower. We're taking it more steady. We're allowing this blooming to happen because you can't force it. We can't push it, but we have to wake up these telepathic capacities. Because when I was a Star Nation being, I flew starships. I was a starship pilot. And I'll tell you something about flying a starship. You can't use radio waves or other kinds of radio communication signals to talk to people on another planet that you're going to travel to. I can't say, yeah, I'm going to be flying over here to the Arcturian system and just want to check and make sure that the area, off the bow of the star near the third juncture is clear for me to jump to that location. Over. I said over. I could sit there and I could wait for, 10 years. It's 10 light years away to this other star. That's pretty close. Maybe it's 1,000 light years away. Maybe I'm trying to really jump across the galaxy. Well, if I'm trying to get information from another star that's 1,000 light years away, I can't use light to communicate. So what do I use? Telepathy. And more than telepathy, I use astral travel. Because inside of our beings is this amazing ability to move our minds to different locations. And so we develop this capacity to move your consciousness to another world. Now, for those of you that are like, move your consciousness, that sounds good. You probably are not saying that. You're laughing that I am. But for any of you that are, just look up Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research. Check out their studies on remote viewing. It's been over 20 years of studies at Princeton proving that remote viewing works. Not only remote viewing, but changing random number systems. That's just one of them. Edgar Casey's group has been proving astral travel and remote viewing. There are countless other groups and societies. I've known ex-Black Ops operatives who that's just everyday business, is like learning how to project your consciousness and witness other locations, get information about other locations. This has been a tool and a practice used even in our modern society immensely. And going back for thousands of years, lucid dreaming, the Aboriginals choosing to go into the dream time, travel in the dream time and look at the astral overlay of the earth from this dream state or astral state to find water holes and map out where certain locations are so they can get to them. These are ancient technologies. And so the easiest way to pilot a starship across the galaxy is you first project your consciousness, fly up on the other planet, check it out, see what's going on, make sure it's clear. You use the body feedback augmentation system built into the ship to confirm that what you're seeing is accurate, because body knows best. Any of you guys done muscle testing know that you can muscle test all kinds of stuff, and your body acts like an antenna for what's going on in your consciousness. So you have a biofeedback and holographic projection technology that takes what you're seeing in your head, projects it in front of you. So it's not all just in your head. You can actually see in your interface what's being transmitted through your mind and feel in the biofeedback whether or not it's accurate. And if something's off, it'll tell you there's something off in your reading. And when you're sure that the space is clear, boom, jump the ship and you're there. And jumping the ship is not about moving through space at all. It's about creating an envelope around the craft in which the object is no longer connected to the surrounding space-time, and it's changing the light program around that event horizon of the ship to match the exact light program configuration of the new location, which you can get through relative positioning between pulsars and other stars and things like that. That's a deep technological discussion, and I'll reserve that for another workshop. But I can tell you that developing our telepathic capacities is absolutely critical for us to be able to not only develop our self-awareness of who we are, but also how we can travel across the galaxy and how we can connect with other star species. It allows us to develop the capacity to see and know each other and see directly what is true of each other. Now, why wouldn't people want this? Why has remote viewing and astral travel and telepathy and these kinds of things been pushed aside, made secret, made occult, made like dark and demonic or whatever? Why wouldn't you want people to have these abilities? Why is it that intuition and psychic abilities have been being literally crucified and, weeded out of the human population through witch burnings by the Christians for hundreds of years? Hundreds of years, literally hundreds of thousands of women and men were slaughtered because they had intuitive and psychic abilities. Why weed that out? Why do that? Why is it now that even though there's been these government programs and secret programs studying these things, how come it's not part of our regular awareness that this is real and this is true? Well, when you're telepathic, it's pretty hard to be lied to. If someone's going to lie to you and you're telepathic, you're probably going to know they're lying. Unless they're really, really, really good. And that means they've somehow been able to shell off a whole part of their consciousness completely. But if they have any cracks, if there is anything that's out of integrity in their physiological and emotional expression to share who they are or share what they are saying is something is true with you, and you can see and feel the place in them that's not in integrity, that's out of alignment, that there's this body physiological muscle testing that's saying, is this true? Yes or no. And your body's going, yes, okay, no. Is this true what, this Black Ops guy is saying? No, it's not. How do I know? Because I'm telepathic, because my body can tell me. And you're already telepathic. That's the thing. That's the secret. You already are. How many times do you remember being in high school or, college and at a party with friends and you decide, I want to get out of here. I'm ready to go. And you have really good close friends. And as soon as you go and you start to, head out or whatever and go out towards the door, boom, they all show up, your friends, and you're like, yeah, I'm feeling like we should get out of here. They're like, yeah, we do too. You're synergized, you're synchronized, you're telepathically connected. And so you're acting in unison. Great sports teams we watch all the time. Boom, you can see their telepathy. You can see the signals. You can see the subtle energy movements that are connecting them to each other. They just may not be conscious of the fact that that's what they're doing, or they're not calling it that. But even the coaches will be like, you got to be connected. You got to be in each other's heads. You got to be working together, right? You got to be in each other's heads. You got to be synchronized. You got to be telepathic. So if we're going to get to this next phase, we've got to learn how to develop these telepathic capacities. That's going to help us connect with star nations. That's going to help us make contact. That's going to help us get to know ourselves and accept the information that we've already been receiving our entire lives. It's going to help us accept the fact that when we had dreams about living on that water planet, that those dreams are relevant to our life. That when we had that moment where we were drifting off and daydreaming and found ourselves in an ancient forest surrounded by elves and fairies and magic, that we weren't just fantasizing, that this is actually part of who we are. That when we had that moment of remembering those ancient stone halls and saw the ancient records deep under the ground and felt the power of the glowing crystals and the magnificence of this space, which can only remind us of something like massive, like a pyramid, that we take into account that Arcturian wisdom that is a part of us. And as we accept that wisdom that's already inside of us, we began to truly feel and truly recognize and acknowledge ourselves and began to accept who we really are, and accept the fact that for most of us, our souls have traveled many worlds. We have known many places. We have experienced many things. And those experiences and that wisdom and that knowledge that we have from being in other places still informs us right now. How often do some of you, pull your phone up and, you're using this device, and this device is able to connect with people all over the world instantaneously, access almost any published human knowledge, Wikipedia, whatever, post photos or videos instantaneously of what's happening all around you right now to anyone anywhere else in the world. Share entire recordings and files and information that you can just keep passing around. Music that you heard live a year ago, you can share tomorrow with your friend. I mean, the kinds of stuff you can do with this device is absolutely phenomenal, right? And yet, how many of you, as you're using this super advanced for humans little device, you're like, God, why is it so clunky? Why is it so slow? How come I can't just make it do what I want it to do? How come this computer thing, why do I have to do it like this? Why can't I just say, please bring up a document for me and record the following thoughts that I have? Why can't I do that? How come I can't take my whole Facebook network and go, show me everybody. There they are. Okay, now show me everybody in San Francisco. Okay, now show me people I met between 2004 and 2005. Okay, right? That seems natural to me. That seems normal. I should be able to do that. And yet, this thing, I'm piloting this mouse and scrolling and click, 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 and then I get this keyboard and I'm this phone that's it'll glitch out, and I'm trying to push the buttons on the screen, and then I miss the key, and I'm crap, oh, this is so hard, and it's so advanced, right? No, but it's not. To me, it's not, because part of me remembers what actually highly advanced computing technology looks like. And it's way easier, and it's way more integrative. And many of us that even use computers all the time feel this. And those of us who don't, part of the reason that we don't is we're it just is so low tech. It's so low technology compared to the magic of the trees and how detail and the beauty and the perfection of all of these incredible things that are all around us, that are obviously way higher technology than what we've got going on in these computing systems. I can't razz on it too hard. It's allowing me to talk to you right now live across the world, but it's definitely not there yet. It's not there yet, and it's not anywhere close to the kinds of technology that many of us are already familiar with and that we already remember, that we know exists. It's not some future projection. We know that it exists, and it does, and it's all over the galaxy, and it's among all of these other species that are out there. So let's dive into those species, shall we? Does that sound fun? We've set some groundwork, feeling good. Leave me a comment in the chat if you're ready to go, if you're feeling good. Also, if you have any questions at any time during this webinar, please just post them in the chat. I'll take a look. I'll answer them when I can. And I really appreciate you guys being here with me today. I hope you're having fun so far. I am. Thank you. So most recently, to being on Earth, I was a Syrian, And I've come to understand the Syrian culture as the elven culture, the people of the land of eternal sun, studying light, learning how to filter sunlight and starlight, learning how to assess the different specific energies and stars by their rainbow frequencies and which elements are coming through those frequencies. We've studied the forest. We know how to speak to the trees. We've learned how to weave and interconnect our lives and our work deeply with the flow of nature and deeply with the growth and the energy of nature. And many of you are probably have some resonance with that particular culture. I meet elves all the time, and most of them know they're elves. They don't often admit it, but they know and they feel it, and it's a deep part of them. The other species that I've mentioned so far is the Pleiadians. Now, to talk about the Pleiadians a little bit more, when I was sharing about the journey into Atlantis and Lemuria and Mu and the Pleiadian nations coming down and helping to seed those. Well, a lot of the reason for that is that there was a lot of big oceans on this planet that need to be connected. And the Pleiadians developed most of their primary culture and their primary species line on a water planet. For those of you that have seen the movie Waterworld, you can imagine something similar to that, where there's just very small island chains. And between these very small island chains, most of the world is ocean. And yet under the surface of that ocean lie whole incredible cities, constructions and ships and caverns similar to those you see in the movie The Abyss. And the island chains is where many of the species youth actually grow up, is on these islands to learn and study and experience what it's like to, be born on a planet and grow up on a land and get to know your world. When I was Pleiadian, I was born on one of these island chains, and I grew up not knowing anything about any star things at all. It was all about, I saw the stars and learned about what different names were for different stars in the sky and that kind of thing. But I lived on this planet, and I thought that this was where our species lived. I didn't know anything bigger. And I learned about how to, gather fruits and cultivate life and grow things, and learned how to connect with and sing to the dolphins and the whales that would come up and connect with us on the beaches, learned how to ride them, learned how to eventually began to sing in a way where I could sing with my voice and actually change the consistency of the surface of the water on the ocean. And in the initiation cycles of the Pleiadian species, when you eventually develop this ability to sing to the water and make the water become a firmament in such a way that its viscosity thickens and the surface tension increases due to the vibration just right, then eventually you learn to actually go and step and walk onto the water. Now, at a certain juncture, at a certain age, when you're ready to do this initiation, you learn how to sing so deeply to the water that you go and you walk out on the ocean, and you walk all the way out to the horizon. And I remember walking all the way out there and getting far, far away from the island, and I'm circular breathing and toning, and I'm just like, wow, where am I going? And as I started getting out there, I began to see this temple structure show up on the horizon. I'd never seen anything like it. And as I got closer and closer to it and came up to this temple, there was a ramp and stairs that went up into it, and I couldn't even see the island anymore that I'd come from. And I stepped onto the ramp and started to walk up into this temple, which looked like this, like this big pointed roof with smooth kind of big round disc hovering like over the ocean, and this ramp going up to it and these little points, going down, touching the water. And I walked up the ramp, and came to the entry door and went inside of this temple and down this hall and then into this chamber. And inside of this chamber, there's this balcony up above, and there are these beings all wearing these blue cloaks. And I can't see their faces. I can't see anything. They're just totally masked in these blue cloaks and standing there and all just looking down at me. And I'm standing on this ramp platform, circular platform, and it comes to an edge. And where the edge is, in the middle of this chamber, going down, is a vortex in the ocean. This like deep spinning vortex just like had formed, going way, 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 way down into, as far as I can see, down into the ocean. And I stood on the edge of this vortex and looking at these beings, and the only thing I could think of to do intuitively was to jump into it. I knew I had come there for a reason. They're not saying anything. There's no instructions, but some part of me just knows that this is what I'm supposed to do, is take this leap and jump into this hole that's going way down as far as I can see. And some part of me just felt it. I had the faith. I'd walked on water. I had the faith that I could do this. And so I jumped off the edge. And as soon as I jumped off the edge, I was caught in midair and suspended there, hovering, and caught in this like gravitational force field. And the water starts changing, and this thread of water starts coming up from the core of this tunnel, and it's like coming all the way up, and the water like thread comes up and it wraps around my body and forms this egg around my body, and my body is like suspended in this egg like a suit, but I have this breathing area, and it wraps all around me like an egg, and I'm looking around, and the ceiling starts to crack open, and it's cracking open like an egg and opening up, and it's lights coming in. And then all of a sudden, as it gets open, I shoot out of it. I fly, and I'm like cruising up into the atmosphere, like over the clouds into space. And I'm flying through space, and these little ships come down, and I see these little light ships, and they fly around me, and they're checking me out. And I'm just cruising up through space, and I start flying towards this massive, beautiful mothership. It's like all these bubbly structures. It looks like organic, living, eel-like being of some kind. Difficult to describe, but like bubbles forming this elongated football-like structure with many lights and stuff. And I'm flying up into the bottom, and I come up, and this thing opens, and I shoot up through this channel, all these lights, and then boom, and then the floor seals, and all the water falls off, and it drains out. And I'm on this like massive bridge structure, like, but not like the pilot's bridge, but this auditorium is a better way to call it, or like inside of a giant mall. Imagine like this huge pavilion space with lights and lights and lights on layers, and these kind of seating area, restaurant looking places in different areas, and people walking across into different portals, and huge open glass transparent windows where you can see through, and there's like ships flying through the corridors inside of this massive mothership, and just patterns in the tiles, and just beings like me but older, walking around, just walking by, just nodding at me, continuing on their way. No greeting party, no nothing, just here you are, next level. Are you ready for this? And that is the way the Pleiadians love to learn. Not, not hold my hand all the way through it, not step by step. Like, who needs to be your teacher? You are your great teacher. When you're ready to ask the right questions, then there will be people that will help you answer those questions and help you ask the right questions. But the real beauty and majesty and magic inside of us is in our own direct experience. And so I directly experienced what it was like to grow up on that planet, directly experienced what it was like to commune with those dolphins and whales. I got to know what it was like to be a Pleiadian in the old way that a Pleiadian is a Pleiadian, evolving on a planet as a species. And when I was ready to take the next step, when I was ready to go beyond the horizon, when I was ready to leap beyond the world that I had experienced and grown up within, I took this leap through this temple and found myself in the real world, the expanded world of the Pleiadians, crossing through the borders of the matrix that I had grown up inside of, and seeing that actually my people were people of the stars, and they had been for thousands and thousands of years. And they had this incredibly advanced technology, unlike anything I'd ever witnessed before. And there I was, right at the beginning, having the chance to explore all of it anew. I could decide, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? What am I going to experience next? And instead of fear, I felt incredible excitement. Imagine just like growing up on a farm your whole life, and the next thing you know, you're on a starship and you can do whatever you want. You can be whatever you want. You can learn whatever you want. It was a powerful transition. And I feel like that story teaches a lot about how the Pleiadians think and operate and act. Sovereignty first. You first. And the singing to the dolphins and whales, and the sound and the resonance of learning how to interact with matter through our voice, is one of the key technologies of the Pleiadians. The sound technology that is able to hold matter in place, vibrating structures of matter in living holographic forms, and holding those forms in place to create living surfaces made of water and other kinds of materials that vibrate, that act like membranes, that have a texture and structure that's more like cartilage, that's more like dolphin skin and more alive than hard metal and solid, immovable type structures. And I began to become aware that the Pleiadians had these amazing underwater cities that I'd never even known about, living on this island chain. And under the water, there's these incredible, beautiful cities built into atolls and reefs and island chains where many, many other beings lived, and that ships would go in and out, but they'd stay away from these island chains where the youth were growing up, where certain youth were being raised in the old way. And these beautiful, amazing, and intuitive beings with this deep knowledge of healing and sound and nourishment have so much wisdom that they have brought to this planet. And I realized that a lot of the keys shared by Christianity through the teachings of who we call Jesus Christ were actually deeply connected to these Pleiadian wisdom streams. The walking on the water, the speaking to the water, the turning water into wine, the leap of faith, the old leap of faith, taking that leap. These are all Pleiadian initiations, and yet here they were on Earth, just as the Celtic knotworks and the braids of the Celtic weaves of energies, and much of the Celtic magic is all Syrian based. The tarot cards and the tarot suits, when the Tuatha De Danann arrived on the shores of the British Isles, apparently riding clouds in the oldest translations, and bringing with them from the 3 islands in the sky, as they put it, these 4 sacred tools those four tools being this cauldron or sacred chalice, and a stone, a magical crystal that we see. Similar stories about this crystal are the stories of some stone that may have existed inside of the Ark of the Covenant. This special spear that supposedly when you carry it into battle, you would never fail, similar to the spear that stories are told about that pierced Jesus's body and blood was on it. And it's now this epic spear. And the fourth key, the sword of light, this incredible sword, which later would be known as Caliburn and eventually known as Excalibur. And that these four sacred tools are also the four suits of the tarot. And they're also related to the four older suits of the Atlantean card deck, which is the hearts, which are the chalices, which are the flowers, which are the spring, the clubs, which is the staff, which is the tree of summer, and it looks like a big tree in the summertime, and the diamonds, which is the stone, which is the pentacle, which represents the fall and wealth and values, and the spade, which is the sword, which is also the winter and is the energy of integration and total interconnection and mastery. And so we have these magical lineages left by the Tuatha De Danann, who were elves arriving in the British Isles, just as we have Pleiadian wisdom and knowledge about singing that's left with the Maori, we're left with Polynesian cultures, in some cases left with Native American cultures and certain other cultures all over the planet, where the Pleiadian wisdom keys have been kept, the teachings of the Seven Sisters. So welcome, Pleiadians. I honor you. I see you. So let's talk about Arcturians for a minute, because the Arcturian story tends to dig in a little deep, and it's an important one. The Arcturians have a very beautiful and complex way of looking at species and ley lines and bloodlines, and the understanding and the importance of ancestry is critical to them, because the Arcturians for many thousands of years have been developing very specific technology to change genetics and weave different genetics together. And so they've been cross-pollinating genetic codes from different species inside their own species and mixing with other species for a very, very, very long time. And in that process of doing that work, they came to understand that you need to know where codes come from to see where those codes are going to go. So if you're going to mix certain kinds of genomes together and bring certain threads together, it's essential to understanding the roots and the knowledge of those threads. Where did they come from? Who are they? What species are they from? What race is it from? Like, what's their culture like? What was the specific ancestral line for this individual being's DNA strand? Because all of that information, the spiritual encoding of any soul, as well as the embodiment that they've chosen to incarnate into, is going to play a role in the genetic mix. It's all important. None of it is junk DNA. It's all important. It's all real-time, actualized information that reflects the totality of a being. And so they take the entire genetic structure into account in this work. And because of this, because of their genetic studies, the Arcturians have looked like many, many, many different kinds of beings. They originally, in my original visions and stories shared with me by the Arcturians, they originally were kind of shorter, stouter-like beings, very similar to the dwarves in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and not just for their physical qualities, although less hairy and certain things not so much, but stouter and shorter for sure, and more reddish type skin, ruddy red. And their initial stream along those lines, and not just for that physical characteristic, but they're like dwarves also because they're stone constructions. They have been masters of building and architecture, building incredibly huge caverns under the ground, similar to the mines of Moria, building pyramids, building incredible temple structures. And the Arcturians were one of the guides that helped to lay in some of the megalithic structures on Earth all over the planet, connecting together these different regions with different pyramids and different infrastructures all over the world. And so, but over time, the Arcturians didn't stay looking like they did originally, because they tried mixing DNA with birds. They tried mixing DNA with other beings. They tried mixing DNA with different humanoid star species and mixing DNA with fish and different animals and all kinds of things. And they began to sort of be able to cosmetically adapt their appearance, their body structure, their DNA, and how they look and feel to whatever extent they want. Imagine if you could get your makeup kit out and basically completely change your face to look like you're from another planet. And you can do this, but they actually were developing these abilities. And as you come into yourself and go through the initiations in your life, you would come into awareness of who you are going to be and how you're going to present yourself. And so you may adapt your genetics at certain points and actually modify your being at certain points to adapt to the way that you're going to live and do your service in the universe. Now, for the Arcturians, many of the initiations that they would provide, and some of which I went through in different journeys in my experience, often involved going deep into the darkest shadow places imaginable. You go deep into the pitch black, dark underbelly of the temple and find your way through this pitch black area by feeling symbols on the walls and trusting your intuition and finding somehow the secret in the chambers of the walls that unlocks the door so that you can proceed. Otherwise, you're going to be trapped in there forever or die. And sometimes underwater in complete blackness, where you have to forge your level of focus and consciousness to move through the dark space, to move through the fear, to move through your own self-doubt enough that you can break through and find the light on the other side and find inside of yourself that strength and that wisdom and that ability to move through initiation through trust and through intuition. Now, some of those same rituals and some of the same exact processes of initiation are present in the Egyptian temples. If you go to Egypt, and there's certain temples where there's deep underground zones, obviously meant to, there's no torch lights, it's meant to be gone through in the dark. And when you're under there, there's all these carvings in the walls, and some of them are very, very interesting. There's a particular temple, is it Dagara? I think it's Dagara, where when I went there and went down into this hole in the ground, only a few people they even let go down there, but you go down into this hole underneath the temple and you go through this corridor, and then the corridor splits two ways. It goes about the same distance to either side. And when you look at all the hieroglyphs on the walls, they're all very similar. A lot of the hieroglyphs are the same going both directions. But then as you get out to the very end, they're very different. On the right side, they stay the same. They stay like, similar kinds of gods, goddesses, hieroglyphs, passing the thing, moving the ankhs, doing the general stuff that you see. But on the left side, when you get down that way, there's this one area where there is certain things on that wall that are to this day complete mysteries to archaeologists. There are a couple people that are holding these massive tubes that look like light bulbs, and they have serpent waves going up and through them. and there's like onks in the base of them. It's like they're being powered by these onks, and they're connected to what looks like wires. And there are also symbols on this wall of what look like a helicopter, look like a spaceship. There's like very advanced looking objects and technologies not found anywhere else in Egypt except for right here in this chamber. And the two massive, you know, bulbs are facing each other, and there's obviously some sort of high level technology going on there. And it is my assessment that it's possible that there's also a secret door there behind them, and that there's actually another chamber that is being sealed off, and that whoever was getting initiated in this passageway would have to go and find that thing and identify through touching it exactly the right spot that is the key to the solution of the puzzle that's in the wall. And when you push that key, that perhaps some secret door opens and there's another passage. And that's partially an echo from my own Egyptian memories, where there were certain things set up like that for deep level initiations. But the Arcturians love that kind of thing. They love the game of going deep and exploring and packing a secret puzzle deep in the stone or in the water, and unfolding and breaking through the places that we're most afraid of to find the truth. Now, many of the Arcturians that I've met in this lifetime and that I've encountered, a lot of them didn't know they were Arcturians. They didn't know anything about star nations or star species, but they had some sense that there was something that they were forcing themselves not to remember, that they were blocking from themselves. And in investigating this, I discovered in the first interaction, there was a woman that I was working with at one point in time, and she actually used to be a product manager for Hewlett Packard, like running teams of hundreds of people. And she had this recurring brain illness in which she would have go into shock and seizures and have like all these issues and have these very, very, very intense neurological challenges that were extremely debilitating. They would always think that she was going to die. And then right before she would die from this strange, unknown illness, she'd instantly recover and she'd come all the way back up and she'd be okay. And this happened to her in her life many times. And this one night working together, we get talking about different things, and at some point extraterrestrial stuff comes up, and she's like, yeah, I feel like I have some connection with that, but I feel like I've blocked it out and I don't know what it is. And so we decide to like investigate it and to figure out, well, what's this block? Like, why do you have this block? What's going on? And so we go into meditation, and we go in and try to assess this thing. And I start to see this like this net. And then next thing I know, there's this being present with us, and she sees him. She says, there's a being here. And I'm like, yeah, there is. And she says, he's showing me something. And I look, and he's holding this crystal, and it's like a crystal ball, and it's got a special geometry. And she says, this is in my head. And I was like, yeah, I feel like this is what I was seeing around your head, is this geometric crystal net that's somehow blocking and allowing only certain information to be processed by your brain. And the guy nods, you know, and his long blonde hair, he looks very Nordic. And I thought I recognized him. I was like, this guy looks really familiar. And he basically asks us, he's like, do you want to remove this? And she's like, yeah, he's saying he can help me remove it. And I was like, awesome, let's remove it. And so basically together, he and I basically take this thing, this net around her brain, and basically very gently start to extract the structure and fully remove the structure from her head. As soon as it was out, I mean, the moment this thing was out of her head, all of a sudden, she becomes like this speaking tube of truth. She's like, oh my God, I'm an Arcturian and I came to this planet on a mission and I was born into this body. And my mission is to basically have these different strange illnesses that I've been having in order to upload information about these very specific neurological diseases to my mission team so that they could help to assess and figure out exactly what's going on with these issues to be able to provide an energetic solution back into the grid of the planet through the healers network. And she's just like, she's just laying it out. And this woman had never had any kind of extraterrestrial thing ever. And she's detailing her exact mission protocols and prerogatives from the Arcturian system, planning to come here, you know, to very specifically do this work. And it was amazing. And so I thanked this being that was there, and she thanked him, and she's like crying, and he leaves, and I was like, I know that guy from somewhere. And then the name pops into my head, and the name I got was Ashtar. And so I go and I sit down at a computer with her, and I bring her over, and I type in Ashtar, and sure enough, here's the classic photo of Ashtar, and she's like, oh my God, that's him, that's the guy. I was like, yeah, I thought so. And I was like, interesting, you know. And that was the first Arcturian that I went through this with. I then went through the same thing with several other Arcturians that had come here with these missions with some kind of block, and usually they would come to me and they'd say, I don't know what it is, but I feel like I have some kind of block keeping me from remembering who I am and why I'm here and what this is all about. And so we would do this energy work, and we'd clear this block, and then the next thing you know, they would have all of this star wisdom and star language pouring through the mission, why they were here, what they were set up to do. And I began to really clearly see that a lot of Arcturians take on these kinds of deep interplanetary spy missions where, like, literally they block themselves from even knowing why they came so that they can do the mission without any kind of other information interference. And only when they complete the mission or enough of the mission would they then trigger the part of themselves that remembers that they did something to block themselves from remembering, and find another ambassador like me to help them remove it, you know, or do it themselves and go through a breakthrough themselves. And so basically this has happened several times, and I really got to know that powerful mission-oriented nature of the Arcturian people through meeting those individuals. Now, on another level for the Arcturians, you know, some of those missions and some of that kind of work I've come to understand is a way for the Arcturians as a species to be in service and give back to the rest of the galaxy, because there were some things that the Arcturians have done in the galactic history that didn't work out so well with their genetic studies and mixing and braiding different DNA together. Now, I talk about this in another very long and explicit session that I do with Alfred Weber of Exopolitics. And this particular session is about galactic history as a whole, in which I cover a lot of the history of what happened with the Arcturians and the Reptilians and the Orion Wars and what actually went down through that entire time period. I invite you to check it out if you want to take a look and watch it at some point. It's about 3 hours long, so it's similar length and depth to this particular workshop. But I'm also doing slides the whole time and showing imagery, and I really get into the depth of it. But the super short version that I'll tell you right now for context is that the Arcturians were attempting to bridge the wisdom, power, and genetics of a galactic dragon species, most of which were inhabiting the Andromeda galaxy, and merge the incredible power and wisdom and literally capacity to morph and affect the fabric of space-time through sheer force of will, like evoking elements, calling fire into being, calling water into being. This amazing power that these dragon beings had, as well as their knowledge and wisdom, and merge and braid that with humanoid life forms and humanoid knowledge and wisdom. And so they embarked on an experiment to basically take this dragon DNA and mix it with different humanoid life forms, with different dragon species, and try a bunch of different combinations and start this whole little colony on a little planet to seed this hybrid race and see how it goes, right? And bring together these very diverse beings into unity and oneness, you know, which is an admirable intention, of course. But they made one very, very serious critical mistake. They didn't ask the dragons for permission. And so, long story short, some of the dragon lords got really upset. And as happens in many species, but is particularly true for dragons, when they would die, they'd often be born into their own descendants. In other words, born into their own ancestry. So they keep these soul lines and bloodlines very, very strongly connected. So you have dragons that were dying, elder dragons, you know, ancient wise beings dying, and then following their genome thread and following it, but it leaps out of Andromeda across the massive galactic gap, and then they're being born into this little colony as a little, you know, raptor-like reptile being that doesn't have huge wings. It's confined to this little humanoid dragon body, and they're like, what? What? How did? And some of the dragon lords and leaders were seeing in their dreams, they were seeing what was happening and witnessing these soul threads suddenly being pulled off into this other galaxy, being born into this other species. And oh, were they upset about it. And so great conclaves were formed, and some of these dragon lords and leaders decided they were going to go and they were going to take revenge. They were going to go and find their dragon brothers and sisters from their own family and be born with them and take out and destroy whoever was responsible for stealing their genetics and taking them away. And they looked at these puny humanoid beings. They had this sense that these humanoid beings had done this abomination of trying to mix the great dragon DNA with these humanoid things, these lesser beings, as some of these darker dragon lords were looking at it, because they were so offended, so dishonored, and so enraged by this process. And so they went. And there was a raid, a massive raid of dragon lords being born as reptilians and then beginning to lead those reptilians into armies and forging technologies and building and expanding and devouring their planet to the point where they began to travel to other planets, and specifically to the planet of the Shiheli first. In which they attacked and began to take slaves and eventually would spread to other areas of the galaxy and create the first galactic empire through their robotics and through their massive attacks. And the Orion Wars ensued because some of the major battles and species like the Shiheli were based in the Orion system. And again, the Orion Wars is just a name that is used by certain channels here on Earth that have talked about some of the things that happened there, not always, to my assessment, to the best clarity and translation, and maybe didn't have very good confirmations and that kinds of thing. The stories that I'm telling you today are based on my transpersonal psychology work with myself and hundreds of other people that I have encountered, I have listened to, I have recorded their stories, I have taken them in, I have cross-referenced them with other people's stories so that I can give you as accurate a picture as possible. And at some point I will release a book, and I'm hoping to get the permission of all of these individuals so that in the back I can actually list by name credits of all of these amazing people that have helped me to do this work and recover this galactic knowledge and galactic history. But until that time, I will just share little bits here and there when there's a reference to be shared. And other than that, leave these beautiful, amazing friends and family of mine to be anonymous until they're ready for that to be shared for them. So it went down pretty hard, and the Arcturians definitely faced some major karma from this. Not only karma, but the trauma of also having many of their people captured, enslaved, slaughtered, and watching literally worlds be destroyed in this process. But I tell you this story because it's important to understand that the reptilians were not by nature dark or evil or bad or innately destructive by any means. It was actually the trauma of these dragon lords who were so upset and so dishonored by the experience of having their genetics stolen that caused them to come to this galaxy and try to take revenge. And the trauma that they experienced and the forgetfulness of being born part humanoid and the lifetimes that would ensue of this drive to somehow destroy the humanoid life or make the humanoid life become subservient to them is a train and a chain of events that has gone on for many millennia in Earth time, and has continued to be an issue all the way through into the modern age here on planet Earth. And we see some of these same exact traumas play out in some of these high banking families and some of these families which are literally dragon families. And when you really dig down into it, you begin to understand that there is even inside of these families the knowledge of some of that. And they're coming from the lineage of some of these darker dragon lords who have this twisted conception of the fact that they are somehow better or more, and they deserve more than these humanoid beings because they're still caught in this trauma that happened so long ago, and they have forgotten even the origin of the trauma. They don't even remember what happened and why they look at things the way they do. Now, there was another tribe of dragons, myself included was one of them, and many of my close friends and family were also dragons in Andromeda, and we witnessed this go down. And we realized we had to do something to try to stop this war from happening, and try to stave off the extremely dangerous threat of having these very enraged dragon lords embodying as humanoids and literally wreaking havoc across this galaxy, this other galaxy. And so many of us bonded together, released, dropped our bodies, and came to be incarnated as Shiheli and as other species in a perimeter around the place where these dragon lords were incarnating as reptilians to try to be able to stop them. Myself and many of my soul family were born as Shiheli. And the Shiheli are a species that grew up mainly on two different planets, a very Earth-like planet, it's a home planet, and a desert planet. And we learned early on to travel between the two planets. They're close in our system, kind of like Mars and Earth. And much of our culture was based on dance and movement and martial arts and expression through the body, performance with fire, performance with energy and movement and dynamics. And we would play out scenarios and battles and expressions and through our bodies express the deepest part of our soul wisdom as part of who we were. And as a dragon being incarnated as a Shiheli, I realized it was kind of the perfect entry to being humanoid, because so much of that energy and the dynamics of that culture deeply, deeply resonated with my own experiences as a dragon, and the power of movement and being embodied, and learning how to move and learning how to express myself in this humanoid body from a young age, by being trained in these martial arts and these dance arts, allowed me to integrate myself as a humanoid much more easily. But as a child, even as a kid, I was captured by reptilian forces, taken to a slave moon where I mined meteorites on a lava moon for a long time. And eventually, with the help of a few of my friends who are still my friends in this lifetime, we figured out how to hack their technology, and figured out a way to basically shut down their communication systems and hack their ships, so that we could eventually steal a freighter ship from one of their little motherships, rescue a bunch of the slaves on the lava moon, and escape and go out into the stars. And I tell this full story in my book, and I also do in some of my other videos, so I'm going to keep it super brief and short. But we basically, eventually made it out, and our freighter ship was rescued by a Pleiadian mothership. We were taken back to our planets eventually. When it was time, we learned that the Earth-like planet that was the Shiheli's, one of our deepest home worlds, was destroyed completely, and that the desert-like planet was being completely raided, and all the cities were being partially overrun or holding off, massive onslaughts by reptilian soldiers. And on the desert planet, many of the cities were built into these mountain ranges, mountains that were very similar kind of color and texture to white bone, and cities that had caverns and doorways that would go deep down underground to beautiful crystalline caverns where water and life and organisms grow and populate. So all our food and everything is deep underground, and all our resources were underground. And so it was easy to hold off those cities for some of my galactic samurai brethren, who in this lifetime, many of them call themselves the Solarians. And so as these raids occurred and as these processes were happening, we realized, those of us that had escaped this lava moon, that the only way to stop these reptilians from assaulting and continuing to assault was to somehow scare them enough to get them to leave our planet. And so we had this idea that maybe we could turn into dragons. And so we used this galactic technology which was a holographic projection technology that would actually morph the physical matter of space-time around our bodies and form us into these large dragon bodies. And we had hints that the reptilians would believe that if the dragons showed up, that they were their gods, and that they would actually listen to their gods. And the truth was that many of the dragons were reptilian lords. And the other truth was that many of us Shiheli and many of us that were there were actually dragons from Andromeda. We'd just forgotten. But this key was like a piece of memory, a piece of remembering who we truly were. And I remember the moments coming down in a light ship to go to where one of the major assaults and raids was happening on one of the cities, and flying in and activating this belt and transforming my body into this large silver dragon, and the doors opening and dragons on either side of me, large dragons, and the doors opening and this plasma-like, playa-like desert wind blows in. And the first time I went to Burning Man, the wind blew into my face through the window, and I immediately remembered and felt this moment again. And as the door opened and I rolled out onto the desert, we rolled up on these massive waves of reptilian soldiers that were attacking, and we roared at them. And they looked at us And they looked at their leaders, the bigger guys who were probably some of the Dragon Lords, and they dropped their weapons and they bowed down to us. They believed we were their gods. And that was the first round of getting them off of our planet, was telling them they had to go. They were no longer, this was not the mission anymore. They had to go back to their home planet and regroup. And we got many of them to leave. Some of them didn't. Some of them, it took months to get them off the planet. We couldn't change form. We had to stay in dragon form and eat larger beings and stuff to feed these bodies, because these were actually material bodies. And our humanoid forms were just embedded in these larger bodies and literally being fed by consumption of these larger dragon bodies. And eventually, once we got them all off the planet, we had this big celebration and reunion with our own people. We're able to take our dragon suits off and turn them off. And then starships came in, and a meeting of different galactic species from around the universe was able to convene. And this is obviously, as you can probably imagine, the shortest possible way to tell this story. But I'm telling you this piece because it gives you context to understand the Shiheli better. Because the Shiheli is one of the species that have helped to seed humanity just as much as Syrians and Pleiadians and Arcturians. The Shiheli have brought martial arts to this world. They brought the Oriental body lines and ley lines. Many of the qualities of the Oriental peoples. Imagine somebody who looks Japanese but with slightly more elven characteristics, and you have a Shiheli. A little darker skin in some cases, but the Oriental body type and genome type that we see on this planet is deeply seeded by the Shiheli races. And this is also why in the Orient, you also find all of these stories about people going up to the tops of the mountains in the Himalayas and up to these sacred places. And then all of a sudden, they get downloaded with the secrets of an entire martial arts form somehow. And they come back down and they're like complete martial arts masters. This is also why when you look at the stories of some of the monks in the Himalayas and the Shaolin temples, there are secret scrolls underneath those temples that when you open them and you look at them, there are very, very powerful martial arts, shamanic, and astral abilities and magic woven into them that involve constellations, following patterns of constellations, star point and axis points in the bodies, specific ways to step in star patterns to activate certain kinds of martial arts moves. And some of those materials are beginning to be translated and come to light, and have been in the works of being translated for years. There's some incredibly deep star wisdom among the monks in the Himalayas, and among the temples in Tibet, and among the Shaolin, and among even the Taoists all the way down into Japan and throughout China. A lot of what we call Chinese medicine is Taoist medicine. It's ancient and old, and it has knowledge of the cycles of the planet and the elements and energies, and is extremely precise, extremely effective at healing. It's an amazing library of knowledge within the body and with our connection to space-time that these Shihelian keys hold. And they are some of the keys of the ancient galactic guardians, what we might call Jedi, because the Shiheli, once joining the galactic community, many of them swore oaths to become galactic guardians, to be in service to these species who had helped them free their desert planet from these reptilian raids. And so in turn would be in service to this galactic community of species as guardians, bringing their martial arts ability, their fighting ability, their knowledge, and their capacities on all of these levels to bear against the continued reptilian assaults that would continue to happen across other planets. So for those of you that are Shiheli, many of you grown up dancing, moving, finding that innate place in you of fluidity and knowledge. You've felt the importance of physical guardianship, and felt called to stand up for people's physical safety and your own at many times. You've known that there's a part of you that can move faster and more efficiently and more effectively than you can even think. And you don't know how, but sometimes you pull off things with your body that just blow your mind. And you just somehow do it. You somehow pull it off. This innate knowledge is inside of you. Many of you are fascinated by red and black as color schemes, and just like the beauty of the red and the black and the dark, and red, black, and white, you know. And for the women, the alchemy of the red and white, which is a whole storyline of its own, but is a deep piece of Shihelian knowledge and wisdom. And the cultivation of your ability to move, of your martial arts, drinking tea, the relationship of inner and outer alchemy, and many of the ideas and energies that we find in Taoism, and the different Taoist arts and Japanese arts, we can find their roots in the Shiheli culture. And so you may identify with many of those and vibrate and resonate with many of those. And also, for those of you who may have read Dune or watched the movie Dune, connecting with the desert planet and feeling the desert worms and the ancient flows, the spice, the connection with the life force in all things, and the ability to tap into the power of that life force. Many of the insights of the Shiheli are also woven into Frank Herbert's series Dune, which uncovers many of these keys, including the two planets, the Earth-like planet and the desert planet, deeply connected with each other. So now that we've covered the Shiheli, I'd like to also branch out again, because part of the storyline of the Shiheli and the Arcturians and the Reptilians is related to another one of the 8 species that we're going to focus on here today. The two kind of totally humanoid or very human-like species that we're covering are the Reptilians and the Zeta reticuli, or the Greys. Now, many of us have been familiar with the Greys in some way or another, because it's the stereotypical alien species that we always see, you know, and it's always like the balloons and the whatever, like the strange human obsession with the Greys as this representation of alien. And there are a lot of reasons for that. There has been a lot of contact between between humans and Zetas, humans and these Greys, for a long, long time on this planet. And especially since the 1950s, when a craft by a Zeta reticuli likely crashed in the area near Roswell, New Mexico, and there were certain information bits recovered and certain things that happened, and a huge disinformation campaign began. There have been many junctures where this relationship with these beings started. And there have been a lot of stories of things like abductions and different kinds of experiments being done by the Greys on humanity. And that there's this strange, non-emotional, very hive-like mind to their nature. That they have these certain, like, very high-level telepathic capacities, but seem cold or distant. A lot of these qualities that we hear about the Greys have a reason for existing. And when we look back into galactic history, you can find the identification of where this goes down, again, in this continued story that I tell with Alfred Weber. And if you want to hear that whole thing, I'd highly recommend it and go for it. But to tell a little bit of it, at one point, there's a period of time in which the situation in the galaxy is very much like the situation in the early Star Wars movies, where you've got the Trade Federation or reptilian robot armies coming in and attacking different worlds. And you've got this small group of Jedi, Shiheli, Guardians, who are trying to, like, coordinate battles and attacks and hold them off. And you have other galactic species who pretty much are caught in the middle, and they don't know how to fight. They don't know what to do. They're not warriors by nature. They haven't had violent conflict across the galaxy in a long time. And so they don't know what to do. And eventually it's realized that there needs to be recruitment of some other series of warriors and species that could actually help in this battle. And so this one galactic ambassador brings forth this plan and says, hey, there's this species and they're already a bunch of warriors, and they could come and they could help us basically fight the reptilians. And they're almost a galactic species. They're right on that edge. And they have all of their technology hooked up. They've got the telepathy going on. And they're all a bunch of warriors and soldiers, and we can recruit them. We've got this whole army. So everybody's like, that sounds great. Let's do it, right? Let's bring these guys, like bring the stormtroopers to take out the Trade Federation. But there was a problem. And the problem there was that whoever this galactic ambassador was, he was playing a different game than anybody knew. And was probably part of a group of individuals that were part of this, that had gone to this planet that was very much like humans are now on Earth, like rapidly evolving, rapidly developing technologies, kind of moving up into this state of potentially becoming a star nation and a star species. And yet these particular beings, the Zeta Reticuli, they had a challenge, a particular challenge, and the challenge was opening up those telepathic abilities. They were very blocked and kind of stuck in that area, but they had a lot of other technology, global internets and that kind of thing, to share information. And so these galactic ambassadors showed up, met with some of their leaders and said, hey, we can help you become a galactic species. All you have to do is install these chips into the backs of your heads. And if you do, you'll get Google with your mind. You can access the internet with your mind. You can chat with your mind. You can talk to each other with your mind. All of that stuff. Imagine you have the access of the entire internet plugged straight into your brain, so that you just literally think what you want to know and you get that information. Or you think to talk to somebody and it sends them information through the Wi-Fi network and through the internet, right? Sounds like a good technology, maybe, right? Maybe, except for that the chips are embedded in your brain. So there's a back door. If there's a back door, if there was any potential for there to be some way to control the information that goes into those chips, you're talking about serious trouble. You're talking about your being programmed. And so these chips did have back doors, and the whole species took them on. They got these things installed. It was all the rage among the Zetas to have these new chips and internet. And it massively accelerated their connectivity and ability to work together and ability to do all of these things. But slowly and surely, overnight, a mother would wake up and say, you need to become part of the, why isn't dad part of the military? A kid would wake up and be like, you guys should join the military. We need to be part of something greater. The man would wake up and be like, I need to become a part of the military. I need to join part of this force. And so the families and the communities of these beings, masculine, feminine, androgynous, there's many, many types of Zetas. They would literally feel driven to become part of this global military force that began being formed. And sure enough, it didn't take very long until most of the planet was militarized. And most of the species was literally programmed to be soldiers. And were losing so much of their individuality. They were starting to become this hive mind that's like mission oriented. Have to do this, have to do this, have to do this. This is what's next. No room for being and exploring and knowing themselves. And so they became like clone soldiers, as it's translated by George Lucas. And those clone soldiers or stormtroopers were then recruited by the galactic ambassadors to come and help fight these reptilian beings. Now, when that went down and the clone soldiers came in, this whole Clone Wars period, which is covered in some Star Wars cartoons, I think, and things like that. This period of time, you know, the Zetas are the soldier army, and the Jedi are working with them, and Galactic Guardians working with them to fight against these reptilian robot onslaughts and try to take out some of their main programming hubs. And that battle went on for a long time, and it was progressing well until at some point those back doors were activated and the switch was flipped, and all of a sudden all those Zeta Reticuli stormtroopers turned against the Guardians, turned against the Jedi, turned against all of the different species that were counting on them for protection. And immediately they became an impressive police force controlled by and run by the ambassador group that was actually working with the Reptilians. And so the next thing you know, it's Galactic Empire. And it was a very, very tough time in this galaxy. It was locked down on all kinds of planets, and many of the Jedi and the Shiheli that had become Galactic Guardians were slaughtered and killed, and their families threatened, and it was nasty. And many of us still have the trauma of this betrayal in our hearts. Many of us still feel this betrayal, and we know now, we know what happens if you install chips in your brain. Any of us who have had any kind of memory or connection to our past, if we can access any part of our past, and we've lived in the galaxy in these different worlds and during this timeline, we know with a gut feeling so deeply why installing chips in your body is a bad idea. And so I hope that you'll take this wisdom and remember to refuse to get any kind of chip installed in your body. There is no way to know whether or not that chip has a backdoor, whether it can stimulate your body in ways that is not being told to you. And that is a very, very high caution point for this particular point in our human evolution, because we finally have the technology to be able to do that. And this is what happened to the Zetas. And through the alliance of rebels, the story is pretty well told by Star Wars, actually. There's a lot of gaps, there's a lot of missing pieces, there's a lot of Hollywoodization and story, telling that's not actually totally accurate to the events. But the overall stream is pretty accurate. The Death Stars were the big programming hubs. That's where the programs were being initiated and shared and installed into the different Zetas that were running as clone soldiers. So their programs and their commands were being, directed to them, along with, verbal programming and command structures. All of the robot armies, which the Reptilians got extremely proficient at building massive armies of robots, were all running based on the programs coming from these Death Stars. And so when the small group of rebels who basically learned how to fight back and learned how to, get some of the secret codes passed by some of the Guardians and Jedi who were captured by the Empire, feeding them little bits of data here and there wherever they could, while trying not to die and trying not to have their family slaughtered. Eventually, those rebel forces were able to destroy some of those Death Stars. And as they began to destroy the Death Stars, those programming hubs would shut down, the robot armies would shut down, and whole massive swaths of these clone soldiers, the stormtroopers, their programming would suddenly stop. And all of a sudden, they would be confused, lost in this hive mind of connection with each other, but not sure what their direction is, not sure what they're supposed to be doing. And so the Zetas, many of them were brought back carefully to their planet, and a restoration process and recuperation process began. And as the species began to start to know themselves again, start to become individuals again, They were invited to come and study other species like humanity, which was young and growing up on this planet Earth, but very individualized, very strong, very driven in their individual nature, and witness them and study them, and even were taught how to send souls to other species, so that the souls of the Zetas could get out of their bodies, which were somewhat locked into some of these programmed natures in their culture now, and get into other bodies and experience what it's like to be a Syrian or a Pleiadian or a human or an Arcturian, and get to know how to feel and think and be an individual again. And that work of recovery has been happening for the Zeta for long time, all the way into the modern era. Many of the abduction stories we hear about and have been told are still by groups of Zeta that are still trying to figure those things out. And usually those stories happen with individuals that are actually Zetas. They're born as humans, and they made contracts with those Zetas as soul contracts to be born as humans, to be abducted, to be studied, to have offspring that are part human and part Zeta, as part of this ongoing mission to continue developing their individuality, sovereignty, and freedom, and restoring their true nature as a galactic species, because they cannot become a part of the rest of this galactic network. They cannot become a part of this galactic council as a whole species until they deal with and address some of these fundamental wounds and get to know their full individual and independent selves again. And so this healing process is still going on. And that's also why the craft that have crashed on Earth have not been like Pleiadian light ships or Syrian ships or Shihelian ships or any of these other advanced Galactic Council species ships, because those kinds of ships do not get messed with by electromagnetic fields. They do not get messed up. They cannot be shot down. They're warping, literally creating an envelope in the fabric of space-time that's completely separating the vehicle from the surrounding space-time, as if it's in another dimension. And so shoot a rocket at it, and it's just going to go either straight through or warp right through the space-time that's wrapping right around the object. Whereas the Zeta ships are not that high-tech. They still use some lower level magnetics technologies that are susceptible to magnetic interference, sometimes have problems in the atmosphere. And so the craft that have crashed on Earth, almost across the board, every one of them has been a Zeta ship. And so the information that the secret government has primarily gotten from galactic species, because they're not really talking to Syrians and Pleiadians telepathically and open to this larger galactic network, most of the information and contact they've had have been with groups of Zetas, because they have Zetas technologies. And they've learned a lot about other species because of the technologies of the Zeta and the records in their computing systems and the kinds of things that they have. So rest assured that even the best alien reproduction technologies that our government has developed have primarily been extremely low-level technologies compared to the galactic technology shared by other galactic species out there. There are a few exceptions. There have been certain drone craft and smaller craft that have crashed and have been recovered, that involve much more advanced extraterrestrial technology. One of those is, I believe, is the Carrot Group, which has published a series of documents. Mainly an individual, the story goes that a certain individual working for the organization was getting out of the organization and decided to try to expose what was going on. And they basically have all of these photos of these smaller drone craft with very interesting language and symbolism on them. And somehow the language and the symbols alone on the surface of these craft actually hold the devices together, hold the craft together. They have cloaking abilities and all kinds of things. I have copies of those Carrot documents that I'd be happy to share with any of you that are interested. I haven't republished them online in some time, mostly because the documents in other places have seemed to disappear. And I like to keep some integrity around the online academies and communities that I have. But if you're interested in that information, I'd be willing to share some of it if any of you want to ping me through the chat. But basically, the point of this portion of my story is to get to know the Zetas and to really get to know that these beings have gone through trauma at a level that you just can't even imagine. I mean, imagine losing your entire individuality as a culture, you know, entire culture, species level programming, and trying to break through from that. It's a really, really big deal. And so it's important to realize that there are some times when our fear of certain species or our fear of what's different, mostly given to us by disinformation campaigns out there, is often tilted, and it's not actually accurate. There's not actually the same like negative agendas that some people would like us to believe coming from some of these different species. There are highly traumatized reptilian dragon lords still out there who still are doing horrible things and are part of the horrible patterns and processes that we've been going through, enslaved here on Earth, and so to speak. And that, of course, is deplorable and absolutely essential for us to look at and learn how to break through those slavery constructs, learn how to get our freedom, learn how to become sovereign, learn how to basically step up and stand up for ourselves and claim our planet back. Because this is humans' planet. This is humanity's world. This is our world. And humanity is a beautiful, incredible, rich species that is designed to be connected to nature and life. We have these amazing vehicles that thrive through connection with the natural world, through eating organic food. And it's amazing to me that we even have to qualify like natural food that doesn't have chemicals as organic, as if it's something different, when that's actually the food that should be growing everywhere. And yet normal, conventional food is pesticide covered and chemicalized and factory farmed and, you know, full of all kinds of junk. And our connection with nature and the natural world is one of the deepest gifts we have as a human species. And through our connection with our planet, through our connection with Earth and Gaia, we actually open up and unlock higher parts of our awareness and consciousness. We're able to unlock the aspects of ourselves that are built to be star species by connecting in to the Earth, by developing our relationship with the Earth. When I take groups out for star watching and calling in ships, as I'm going to do, by the way, at the Shiheli Ranch, September, I believe it's 27th or 28th through October 2nd. So coming right up at Shiheli Ranch near Portland. It's about an hour and a half outside of Portland, near Mount Adams. I'm going to be doing a workshop series with Laura Eisenhower, James Gilliland, and others. And we're going to be calling in ships at night. And one of the things I like to do to help people ground in to be able to call in ships is I get them building medicine wheels. So picking up rocks, touching the ground, building a circle on the ground, creating a portal on the Earth that allows them to feel anchored enough with the Earth that they're then grounded enough to receive the energy level and communication level of the star species out there. You can think of your body as like an electrical circuit. If you're not grounded enough, you short circuit. If you're starting to feel short-circuited by all this information being downloaded to you on this thing, get grounded, get in your body, root yourself, get in your feet. That moves the energy through. That allows you to have a wider capacity to receive charge from this kind of download and actually allow that charge to move through your body so that you integrate the information better. If you want to find out more about that, I will post a link in the chat. So I'll just do it right now. I believe that's the one. And we still have some registration slots open. So if any of you guys want to come and check it out and stay with me in person for days and rock it out and call in ships and that kind of thing, that would be totally awesome. Thanks, Neil. I didn't notice I just posted that straight to you. So yeah, getting grounded is one of the critical things. And there's another star species we haven't talked about yet that their entire experience and expression and ability to connect with and travel to the stars has been based on the fact that they've been so connected to their planet. I call this species the Jahonians, and that is my best capacity after about months and months and months of working through the sound and the feel of their language and their it's kind of what they sound like, and getting to know their language and their energy enough to be able to translate the name of their species. Their species are humanoid. They're very much like us, but they're dark skinned, look dark like African or Nigerian. The bluer black and also reddish black and greenish black, different kind of skin tones. Their planet is very much like Dagobah out of Star Wars, deep jungle planet, rich with life and marshes and just jungles everywhere, and mountains and jungles and lakes and jungles and small oceans with jungles around, and just deep rich life all over this planet, and often deep cloud cover, and lots of rain. And this species, evolved and developed with this wisdom and this capacity to recognize that every single plant, every single form of life has a specific medicine key. Every single type of life has its own vibrational medicine. Every leaf, every piece of grass, every flower, every tree, every root, all of it, every seed has wisdom, has something to share with us. And so much of their culture's development is studying these different medicines, these different pieces of life, the herbs and the mixtures of herbs and the mixtures of roots and the mixtures of things, to understand how the body vehicle works and responds to different energies and different vibrations from different elements and different types of plants and animals. And this species developed a very wide range of different kinds of medicines like ayahuasca, which is known generally as sourced by an Amazonian tribe. And yet the Amazonian people, when they take ayahuasca and they go on journeys with this particular medicine, which is made from a very specific root and a very specific leaf, and when these two things are brought together, which, why would you mix like this one root with this one leaf when there's like billions and trillions of combinations of plants out there? Somehow they pick this exact root and this exact leaf, mix them together and form this brew. And this brew has incredible healing properties and helps you cleanse, intense dark energies out of your body, and opens up a vision space. And many of the ayahuasqueros and shamans, which shaman is not really the appropriate word, but the ayahuasqueros who have used this medicine often articulate starships and other planets and other species. They've learned how to use this medicine to connect with star families and star nations. And I have personally done ayahuasca a couple times. And my first journey with ayahuasca, I basically went over, drank the cup in the ceremony, sat down, and then I laid back. And the second I laid back, I was shot out of my body and shot through a wormhole. And then the next thing I knew, I was on a planet. And I basically experienced one after another each planet of the 6 star species that I'm focusing on today, other than the reptilians and the zetas. And I got to experience a direct initiation with each one of those species. Very, very powerful initiations in which it was full on 100% consciousness. I was there. I was not in my body. I was not on Earth. I was there, and I experienced these initiations with these beings. And those initiations taught me and confirmed for me the medicine and the wisdom of these species more powerfully and potently than almost any of the other work that I've done studying them, including astrally traveling there or meeting lots of people from there and getting to know their stories. This was a very, very direct stream of my connection with these worlds, and formed for me a baseline. And I didn't know the names of these species. I didn't know which the worlds were that I was on. I didn't know anything about that stuff. It was just very pure, deep, total immersion in direct elemental and archetypal knowledge from each one of these species. And that connection that I felt inside, then I could use to understand and start to translate and draw correlations between Pleiadians with the same experience, or Arcturians with the same experience, or Jahonians with similar experiences and energy. And the Jahonians, going back to them, this is just one of the many medicines that they have developed and have shared with other worlds to work with our consciousness in a new way. And for the Jahonian species, one of their ways of actually becoming part of the galactic network is they would sit inside of trees, and they'd go inside of these big trees, and they'd use the tree as an energy body to empower and increase their own energetic vibration and consistency, and then shoot out of the tree into space, fly through the stars, and find other planets, find starships, and make contact on the astral with many of these other species. Now, the thing is that once you're telepathic, you begin to pick up information from not only corporeal beings, but non-corporeal beings. In other words, you begin to witness spirits. You begin to see spirits around, like ancestors, guides that have passed. So many of the galactic species have deep familiarity with talking with a spirit being. It's beautifully displayed in Star Wars, where it's like, Luke looks over and he sees, his dad, Vader, once he's died, and he looks over, he sees Ben Kenobi, and there's Yoda, like all the guys that have died, and they're chilling, they're just in spirit bodies now. But that's very accurate to seeing like the kind of way that many of the star species out there have developed this ability to just, when there's a spirit or a being present, they acknowledge it. There's a spirit here. Same thing if someone astrally projects. So the Jahonians would come astrally projecting into their ships, and they'd be like, hello, welcome, and the computer would recognize that there's an astral construct here for the ship, and help to actually illuminate the presence of this being that's on the ship. And after enough visits and times where the Jahonians would come and they'd visit, they'd talk, they'd come to council sessions, they'd share with them, they'd share medicine as offerings to the star species. The star species would offer them insights and wisdom. Eventually, the Jahonians invited them to come to their world and visit them in person. And so the star species eventually came down, Galactic Council species, and landed and met with them. And they were ready. They were right there with their temples in the forest and ready to meet them. And they gathered together, connected together, and the star families and star tribes offered these Jahonians many technologies, including starships and things like that they could use if they wanted to travel the galaxy. And some of the Jahonians would go on to become Jedi, to become parts of these galactic communities in different ways. While others would stay on their home planet and just continue living in the simple way that they had lived in for a long time, and continue to develop their own medicines and their own abilities. But many of these Jahonians also joined in this mission to come to Earth and to be born as humans and to explore the incredible living library that is Earth and the jungles of Earth. My goodness, what an amazing library. And so they came here and they would bring these medicines, they bring this knowledge and this wisdom from their world to Earth. And many of those medicine threads are still key threads that are shared by different indigenous cultures and different species around the planet. So for all of you Jahonians out there, you probably have a connection with plant medicines. You probably just love the idea of sitting in a tree and astrally projecting. You probably love dank, wet, deep marsh jungle spaces, and you just love it and you feel it and you can connect with it, and it's part of your body, it's part of who you are, and you feel that importance of honoring each plant and each piece of vibration. You know, you probably have a bunch of jars of herbs on your wall, or, you know, collections of posters of what different flowers and plants do for different people. These are all, you know, Jahonian qualities. And so yes, very blessed. So we have about 12 minutes left. So I'm going to finish by covering the last of these 6 galactic species that have seeded humanity. And I already covered the 2 others that I wanted to cover today. The last species was also the last one that I experienced in this initiation when I was going through this journey and on ayahuasca. And this last species, I had never encountered anything quite like it. I was suddenly in this illuminated light field, and I could see cities of light and infrastructures built of light, like a library constructed of light that was encompassing this just incredible scale. And I was learning and listening to them and how to organize and architect my light body and construct a new level of a weave in my body by weaving these threads together and activating these different large ribbons of light, moving in this egg around my whole body from down below my feet to up above my head. And it was like a rainbow egg where all the baseline parts were like deep magenta into red, into orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, violet, white light. And I was activating these light threads in different tiers. And as I did so, I started to become fully aware of these different levels of this library of consciousness that was available to me. And as I activated and awakened this entire egg, it was like I completed some aspect of reintegration of my nature, and also received this deep initiation wisdom from this star species, and began to have moments where I began to see and experience this species would come to me and teach me things, and I would begin to see them in the stars as I had begun to see other species like the Shiheli, and translating their guardian seals, the Pleiadians, and coming to understand their song and language and how to identify Pleiadians by their brilliant eyes and the way that they love sound and music, and cetaceans and dolphins and whales, and have many Pleiadian friends, and identify the elves and the Syrians that I've met that have these very strong elven qualities. Sometimes elven and Pleiadian, sometimes Arcturian, Pleiadian and elven, sometimes you know, many different pieces of different species are similar and have interacted and have shared genomes and genetics, and not to mention that those souls have often incarnated as many different kinds of races here on Earth. And yet the archetypal threads of the deepest feeling of connection is usually stronger in 1 or 2 or 3, sometimes 4, I mean, sometimes all of them, but there are often very strong threads underlying there that connect people to these energies, because these are actually light threads of the ray of creation expressing themselves through these different species, and we tune to these different rays as we come into our different incarnations in our bodies. And so this species, they had this very, very, very ancient world. They grew, they evolved, they developed, they learned how to travel to other worlds. They began to learn how to literally transform their body from physical matter into simply energy and back again. They learned how to change their level of frequency and vibration to the extent where they could be physical and they could be non-physical, actually transmuting their matter inside of their own bodies into different forms. Now, as they evolved and they developed this capacity, their solar system was also evolving, and eventually their sun became a red giant and then eventually a supernova. And as that occurred, their entire planet was completely destroyed. And yet they kept somehow the astral construct of their planet. They literally kept the shadow body of where the planet was as a light body, and had built so many astral structures into the physical planet that when the physical planet was dissolved in the supernova, their planet was still fully intact in its light body. And it became a massive record-keeping center for the galaxy, like an Akashic records point to store information all the way through in these light cities that would go all the way into the core of the planet, out these light tubes and into these massive infrastructures all over the surface of the planet, all made out of this crystalline astral light structure. And that this planet you could actually use to communicate with and ask the planet questions, and it would respond to you like a living entity with responses, because it was a living entity, as every planet is. And this library of knowledge being stored from around the galaxy was kept and held by this elder species with these abilities, whose name, they told me, is La'Quinonwininanuinea. And it took me a while to get that one right, months and months of practice and training and figuring it out and asking them to sing it to me. And I call them the La'Quinon for short. But I've met many of these La'Quinon beings here on Earth. And many of the people with La'Quinon lineage deeply identify with the power of the archetypes, the power of understanding that what would it be like if you mixed the archetypal structure of a culture like, Renaissance France, and you stick it together at the same time with like Aboriginal tribal culture and just like mix that up. Let's see how that goes. Or what if you take steampunk era, with medieval era, and you stick those together? Or you take advanced technology time and you mix that together with, samurai and ancient Japan. Like these kinds of combinations of very different archetypes of consciousness that evolve and play out on different planets and repeat and cycle through and are always a little different, but always in a new situation. They are deeply fascinated by these mixes and the different ways that these different archetype lines of consciousness come together. And so they've often created entire holographic dream worlds and interfaces where they experience, like a holodeck, whatever they want as the play of what's coming together. And some of these beings also have this deep sense of parenthood over other people and other planets, feeling like many people are their children, and that they actually helped to seed the worlds where those beings grew up on, or they helped to, stabilize and assure that this one star species or another would make it through this transition, integrating these different archetypes of consciousness together. So very high level spiritual archetypal weavers. And I often think of them as the purple ray among the spectrum of these different species, and connecting to that third eye vision, that capacity to see beyond matter, to know that we're more than just physical beings. We are spirit. We are living spirit expressing itself, incarnated, and we can be anything that we want to be. We can transform. We can become whatever we can imagine. This is just one game that we're playing. This is just one round of participation in the infinite eternal unfolding of all that is. And when you have that context, you take things a little bit more lightly. You realize that this can be fun. Consciousness evolving can be fun. Taking back this planet can be fun. We can do it. Overcoming these crazy mixes of other species and slaves and all this stuff and black ops and just all the mess of this world that we've made. You know what? We can make it fun. We can clean this up in a fun way. And to do that, we have to be able to get above the puzzle and play it like a game and see it as the game that it is, and see that the game in some ways has been rigged. And if the game has been rigged, then we have to decide on new rules. We have to actually access new rules to change the game. And to access new rules, you have to make a bigger game board. You have to expand your consciousness of what the game is that we're actually playing. And that is developing this galactic consciousness, developing this recognition of who we are, feeling that Pleiadian part of ourselves, and going out at night and meditating on the Pleiades and asking them to connect with us, getting really grounded, getting really in our bodies, getting really on the earth, and then opening ourselves up to the consciousness in the stars, asking questions and getting silent enough on the inside that we can hear the answers and receive the answers. Talking with people about it. Talk to your friends about the fact that you feel like you're an Arcturian. Talk to them about it. Deal with the fact that they may not get it right off the bat. Who cares? If you don't bring it up, if you don't explore it, you will never get the confirmation that you're looking for. Because there are people in your life, there are people that will show up for you that are there to remind you who you are. They're there to remind you of yourselves. And there's deep, deep wisdom in our communities. If you're willing to go there, if you're willing to approach it, you can share some of the insights and the principles and the feelings that you got during this webinar. You can share some of the keys and the insights that you're learning from other webinars on Portal to Ascension, from other speakers and other people. Or you can share from things you learned at the Guardian Alliance in our online academy, which I invite all of you to come and participate in. If you're here to be guardians of this world, here to be stewards of the future and where we're going, here to make things right for our children and our children's children's children. It's essential that we start stepping into our power and who we are. And that means not being afraid of what other people are going to think of us. If I had stayed hidden in a hole, having all these experiences and not being willing to get out in front of a camera or in front of some people and say, I remember being an extraterrestrial. If I was too scared to do that, so much of my life work would never have unfolded. I had to be willing to face that ridicule. I had to be willing to face that shame, whatever people would put on me. And believe me, look at my YouTube videos, see a lot of haters out there. That's okay with me. I can see their trauma. I can see their pain. I can see that they're afraid. I can see that they're not willing to face parts of themselves that I trigger. And that's all right with me. And I'm here to help, and I'm down. For those people that are ready, I'm here for you. I'm here to serve you. I'm here to be your ally and to be your friend and to be an ear and to be a face that you can look at, you can talk to and say, this is what I'm going through. And I'll say, I understand. And you know what? There are other people around you in your life that are like that too. Find them in workshops like this. Find them in webinars like this. Find them in online academies like the Guardian Alliance. Find them in the Resonance Academy. You'll find them. Find them and connect with them and share with them what you're experiencing, because then you're going to get them to share back And you're going to realize that so many of the things that you've doubted, so many of the things that you haven't been sure about, so many of the things that have plagued you as a question forever will be answered. And those answers can come from inside of you and through your community and through your family and your friends. Isn't that exciting? Oh, well, I think I've talked for 3 hours straight at this point. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to stay for maybe another 10 minutes and just wrap up the questions. I don't want to go over time too much. I see a first question here from Mina. I wonder what species make up the North American Indians. Well, that's an interesting one because different tribes of the North American Indians, Native Americans, have different relationships with different star species. You know, some of them like talk about those species very specifically. White buffalo calf woman is supposedly from the Pleiades, for example. The Hopi tribe talk about the blue star Kachinas, and they talk about the Syrian system. But genetically, what you see in the red corn people, and from the Mayan standpoint, you're talking about these very specific genetic ley lines. The red corn people are people that are Arcturian in their lineage, mostly. And so there's this Arcturian stone ancestral wisdom piece, identifying the wisdom of the ancestors, identifying how all life is interconnected through DNA, through blood, through genetics. That's a very strong line for many of the Native American species, Native American tribes. And I believe that there's a strong presence of the Arcturian genome there. I also see strong Arcturian genome in the Jewish background and Jewish tribe. A lot of the qualities I see in Judaism and in the very specific kind of physical architecture of the Jewish race. I also see clear Arcturian parallels there as well. From Judith, established direct contact is get grounded, put up my question, and listen. Ah, yes. Is that it, right? Actually, yes, that's pretty much it. First, though, is opening up yourself to being aware that it's possible to make contact and it's possible to have a telepathic communication. So it's good to try doing this with a friend, with a partner. Just experiment. Like, if I send you this thought, can you receive it? You send me this thought, can you receive it? You can do it with energy as another way. Like, this is a really fun one that you guys can take with you. I do this in a lot of my Jedi training workshops. But what you do is you basically relax your hands and you allow there to form a little energy ball in your hands. And when you create the space in your hands, some of you may not have ever done this before, but when you create the space and you bounce it and you wiggle it, you're going to feel that little egg of energy there. You can actually see it against a dark surface if you look carefully. But you can also create a ball like this and you can tune it to a very specific element. So choose fire, air, earth, or water. Create the energy ball focusing on just one of those elements and then hand it to a friend. Let them take it in their hands and feel it and have them describe to you what it feels like. It feels hot and kind of sparkly and kind of tingly, or I feel like warm and tingles, feels like it's trying to escape through my fingers. And when they feel that and they describe that, see if that description connects to what you were thinking in your mind when you created the energy ball. It's not about getting it right. It's about understanding that how you create energy with your mind is related to how someone receives energy. And that connection between how we create energy, pass energy, and receive energy is the root of our telepathy. Now, if we develop that ability a little bit more, and we actually spend some time and we go to a place with very little light, where there's lots of open stars, and you decide to really get present, get grounded, make a little medicine wheel, make a little altar, get grounded in your body, do some Tai Chi, some Qigong, stretch, yoga, whatever it takes, dance, lay down, get yourself fully engaged in your body, and open yourself to the stars. And there's a couple techniques for initiating a communication. One of them is called star linking. So if you look at one star, you might see another flash, look at that star. You might see another flash, look at that star. And then look for another one to flash, look at that star. And then usually you'll end up with like a little circle or a connected space of stars that flashed in your periphery. And then focus on that plate like a holographic surface, as if you're looking at a screen. And then send a communication to that, through that, asking to connect with a very, very specific ambassador of a very specific species. So I would like to speak with a Syrian ambassador. Please respond to me. I would like to contact you. And you're sending that information into the plate, and then issue forth a question, something you want to know, something that's been on your mind. It can be as simple as what's your name, or as complex as how does holographic sound technology work? And then pay attention. Watch the stars, see what blinks, see what moves, and allow your mind to be open, whatever thoughts come in. When you think that you've answered your own question with your own thoughts, that's because there's new information entering your head that is filling in and activating your own thoughts to complete the cycle of your question. So that's the part that you have to be willing to accept, that sometimes telepathy sounds like you talking to yourself. But you can verify that and practice verifying that by having other people communicate with you and you communicate with them, and practice those telepathic exchanges. And then you'll realize that even though you think might be you answering your own question, it's actually them answering that question, or it's actually their thought that you're picking up on, and you just hear yourself louder than them because you're more used to hearing yourself transcribe what's going on all around you all the time, like your inner narrator. Okay, so that should help you get started and play with that some. Couple of those alien races sound similar to Star Trek characters. Yes, Vulcans, elves, you got it, totally. I've met some beings that look very, very, very much like Romulans as well, with similar kind of bone structures in their heads. And some beings that look a lot like the Romulans. The name I got for them is the Tierra Danan, and many of the Tierra Danan are actually hybrids that the Reptilians created from their own DNA with other humanoid DNA. So it's like a step further closer to the other humanoid species from the Reptilians. And some of those beings that were created by reptilian rapes and experimentation and things like that that happened during the Orion Wars are their own whole species now, and they're independent and they're beautiful, and they've always been trying to bridge and heal this deep galactic wound. At least some of them, and others are more traumatized, as you can imagine is likely to happen. All right, well, it's 6:10. I can maybe take one more if there's anyone that pops one out. Otherwise, I'm going to close it up. And it's been such a pleasure connecting with you guys. Your presence is obviously strong and open, and many of you have listened very deeply or watched deeply. And I feel that as I'm sharing. And I want you to know that your presence has helped me to be present and connecting and communicating with you. Because otherwise, I'm just sitting in this room talking to myself. But I'm not, because I feel your presence. I feel all of you witnessing me. I feel all of you connecting with me. And I'm just really thankful for your presence and your deep, deep listening and deep awareness with me today. And I hope that I've provided you with some good tools to take and to explore in your own adventure, and to take with you into the world of exploring yourself and getting to know parts of your connections with these other beings and species, and also really knowing who you are and what you're here to do and what you're about. That's some of the most juicy stuff. It's getting to know our own qualities and making sense of all of the different dynamics that are inside of us. So thank you guys again for being here. We have 38 people viewing live right now. Thank you guys all for being here. And I know there's another whole group of people that registered that'll get to watch the replay for this. And thank you guys so much. You can always find me and get in touch with me. Just Google Adam Apollo, and there's lots of ways to reach me and find me. And for those of you interested in learning more and studying more, we just released a new version of the Resonance Academy for Unified Physics. You can go to resonance.is and see the new series of sites from the Resonance Science Foundation, is what we're calling it now. And there's an amazing film release actually going on in LA tomorrow for the Connected Universe, featuring Nassim Harameyn's work and Sir Patrick Stewart. That's right, Captain Picard, also known as Professor Xavier, is narrating the whole film, talking about unified physics. So this is an awesome, awesome announcement I get to make. And the film release is tomorrow in LA. You guys will be able to find it on Vimeo shortly after, but come join us in the Resonance Academy to explore some unified physics. And also in the Guardian Alliance, you can come and join us, guardian.is. And I'm happy to paste a link in here in just a minute with like a discount link that you guys can use if you want to come and check out some of those courses. We have free courses, we have membership-based courses. They're all very inexpensive and affordable and fun to take. And I'd love to have you guys come and join me over there. And other than that, be blessed, know yourself, give thanks, and may all of your questions be answered. And may your hearts always find that where you are is home. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day, beautiful night, wherever you are. Take care, and I'll see you guys again soon. Aloha.